right, good morning, council. Anything we need to put on the record before we invite the jurors to join us? All right, Deputy Jacks, let's have the jury, please. Members of our jury panel. Mrs. Robertson, would you please draw the number of an alternate juror?
Jury number 795. Please have a seat in seat number 9.
All right, at the conclusion of the morning session this morning, Mrs. Robertson will renumber the seats. All right, thank you. All right, Mr. Fung, would you resume the witness stand, please? All right, good morning, Mr. Fung. You're reminded you were still under oath, sir. Mr. Sheck, you may continue with your cross-examination.
Morning, Mr. Fung.
Good morning.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Mr. Fung, you mentioned yesterday in your testimony that you were aware that there was a protocol and procedures manual at SID.
This is overruled. Said he was aware of it, hadn't seen it. Yes or no? Are you aware of it?
I am aware of a manual. I don't know if it's in effect or not, though.
Yes, just to be precise, I think I asked you, are you familiar with the field procedures manual? And you answered, I am. I know one has been written, but it has not been put into effect. Is that what you said yesterday?
I may have said that. I don't recall exactly.
And now, are you telling us, sir, that as far as you know, there is no manual in effect that establishes protocols and procedures for your crime laboratory?
Well, that's
Overruled. Is there a manual?
I'm not aware of one.
Well, I think you said before you know one has been written, right?
I know a draft has been written.
Okay. Your Honor, I'd like to mark this volume
You can mark it.
next in order.
Next in order.
Just show it to the...
Okay.
Now, why don't you take a look at that volume, sir, the table of contents, and read through it and see if it refreshes your recollection as to whether or not you've seen any of those documents before.
Yes, I have.
Oh, so you have seen this?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So are you telling us that you've seen that, but you don't know whether those protocols and procedures are in effect? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know that this manual is policy for our laboratory. It may be just a rough draft right now, subject to review.
Well, it contains various protocols and procedures for criminalists, does it not?
It contains proposed procedures for criminalists, yes.
So in other words, you've seen these written protocols and procedures, but as far as you're concerned, you don't necessarily have to follow them. Is that what you're saying?
That's not what I'm saying, no.
Okay. Are the protocols and procedures in that manual rules that you believe you have to follow?
I have not reviewed the entire manual, so I can't state yes or no for that.
Okay. Then as they come up, perhaps we'll look at them one at a time. And if you want, that volume's yours, and you can take it over the lunch period and look at it. Fair enough?
Sounds,
Sustained.
Now,
That last comment is stricken. The jury is to disregard it.
well, is it your position, sir, that the protocols and procedures at the crime lab are communicated orally?
they are communicated through an SID academy that is given to criminalists in our division. Some of the procedures have been handed out, and much of it is oral and through experience on the job training.
So there are some written handouts that you get,
I have received handouts before, yes.
and some of them, just in your quick perusal, seem to be in that manual.
Yes.
And others are sort of communicated orally,
Some of them are communicated orally, yes.
sort of an oral tradition within the laboratory.
Yes.
Okay. Now, this document, this manual, that's in the evidence processing room for purposes of reference, isn't it?
To the best of my recollection, I think it is kept in there, but
And
I
the
don't
reason it's kept there is in case somebody needs to look at it, it would inform them as to the procedures and protocols contained within it.
Objection, calls for speculation.
Overruled. Do you know?
that is possible.
All right. And there's also one of these manuals in your crime scene response truck.
I'm not sure of that.
Well, why don't you look at, may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Volume 1, page 1, let me call your attention
Wait a
to
minute. Can I approach now?
just,
You may.
yeah, please.
Before counsel needs anything.
Not going to read anything, I'm just going to direct the witness's attention to a paragraph, ask him to read it, and see if it refreshes his recollection.
Your Honor, I'd object to the procedure because there's no foundation. His recollection needs to be refreshed.
Sustained.
Now, do you recall whether or not it's required that this manual is supposed to be in the crime scene response truck?
I don't know if it is supposed to be there or not.
All right, so perhaps you could look at the first paragraph there and see if it refreshes your recollection as to whether or not a copy of this manual is supposed to be in the crime scene response truck.
Your Honor, I object to same objection.
Overruled on that ground.
According to the paragraph, it says it should be.
Your Honor, I don't believe the witness was asked to read, so that's out loud. It's not response.
All right, sustained. We have a major foundation problem here.
I think he indicated he wasn't sure. Okay.
That's right.
You spent how long in the trace analysis unit?
Approximately 3.5 years.
And that would be what period?
That would be from 1987 to 1990.
Are you aware of whether or not a copy of this manual is supposed to be in the trace analysis unit?
At that time,
At any time, to your knowledge?
to the best of my knowledge, this was not created until after I left the unit.
Well, when was this manual created?
I don't know.
Well, you said you left in 1990.
Yes,
All right. Would this manual have been pulled together 1992?
House stipulation.
Overruled.
There's a date at the bottom of the page that says Rev A, 1992.
Now, is it your understanding, sir, that this manual is supposed to establish the protocols and procedures for the daily operation of the crime scene field
Let me see
unit?
counsel at sidebar with the reporter. Thank you, counsel. Proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. I believe you told us yesterday, sir, that you got a call to respond on this case at about 5 a.m. from Ms. Mazzola.
No,
What time was it?
approximately 5:30.
5:30. And at that time, what did she tell you?
She informed me that there was a scene we needed to respond to in West LA Division.
Anything more than that?
She may have said it was a homicide.
And you then met her next at the SID laboratory?
Yes.
Well, she picked you up, I guess, at home. Was that it?
No. We met at the laboratory.
And about what time was that?
It's approximately 6:45, around there.
So the first call that you got about this case was, you're saying, at 5:35?
I believe I said around 5:30.
Around 5:35. And you now realize that that's about 5 hours, 5.5 hours after Officer Risky first discovered the victims at the scene on Bundy.
Sustained.
Well, when you conferred with the detectives later in this case, did you ever learn when the first officer arrived at the scene?
Hearsay.
Overruled. Yes or no?
I don't recall being informed of the exact time that the bodies were found.
Well, were you informed as to when the scene was secured?
I'm sorry. I had that question.
Were you ever informed?
You've got it right there in front of you.
Were you ever informed of when the crime scene at Bundy was first secured?
It may have been discussed by Detective Lang when he gave me my walkthrough.
All right. When you arrived, you arrived at the Rockingham location about 7:15?
According to my notes, I arrived at Rockingham at 7:10.
7:10. And when you arrived at Rockingham, did Detective Van Adder tell you that there was another crime scene at Bundy,
Yes, he did.
and he told you that 2 people had been murdered there?
That calls for hearsay.
Sustain.
Did you learn in your discussions with Detective Van Adder that there were 2 victims at Bundy, and the bodies had been discovered at 12?
Same objection.
Sustain.
Is there any requirement that the criminalists should arrive at the crime scene as soon as possible?
A requirement?
Yes. Any rules or procedures as to how long it should take for a criminalist to arrive at a crime scene once you receive a call?
Once we receive a call, we try to respond within an hour if it is possible.
Within an hour?
We try to, yes.
Okay. So, Ms. Mazzola called you at 5:30,
Yes.
and you got to the scene at Rockingham at what time you're telling us?
7:10.
7:10. So, what's that, an hour and 15 minutes from the time you were called?
An hour and 40 minutes.
40 minutes. Better. So about 2 hours, right?
No, an hour and 40 minutes.
Hour and 40 minutes. Ms. Mazzola was called, you realize, at 5 o'clock, right?
Calls for hearsay.
Sustain.
Were you ever informed that Ms. Mazzola received her first call at 5 a.m.?
Same objection.
Sustain.
So your response time to Rockingham was an hour and 40 minutes.
Yes, it was.
All right. Now, when you got to Rockingham, you had a conversation with Detective Van Adder, did you not?
Yes, I did.
And it's a requirement that you should have a discussion immediately with the officer in charge of the investigation.
A requirement?
Yeah. Aren't you supposed to start your activities at the crime scene with a conversation with the officer that's in charge of the scene?
It's preferable.
Well, on your crime scene investigation checklist, isn't there a category indicating crime scene discussed with officer in charge?
There is a place for a check mark, yes.
And isn't that the first thing you're supposed to do, is have a discussion with the detective or the officer in charge of the scene?
No,
You're not supposed to do that?
no.
When are you supposed to do that?
After you check in with the login officer.
All right, so you log in, and then the first thing you do is have a discussion with the detective in charge of the scene.
If it is possible, yes.
All right? And the reason that you have a discussion with the detective in charge of the scene is to find out what it is you're supposed to be investigating,
Yes.
and to find out what possible evidence exists at the scene that may need to be collected.
Yes.
And you had such a discussion with Detective Van Adder when you arrived at Rockingham.
Yes.
And did you learn that you weren't just going to be collecting evidence at Rockingham, that you would soon have to go to Bundy?
Yes.
And that there were 2 victims at Bundy?
Yes.
And was there any discussion about the victims at Bundy being very close to evidence in terms of their physical proximity?
Calls for hearsay.
Sustain.
Would it be important for you to know what kind of crime scene you were going to have to going to after Rockingham?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah. When you got to Rockingham, all right, you knew you would be having to go to Bundy next, correct?
Yes.
All right. Were you told that Detective Lang was waiting for you at Bundy?
Objection, call for hearsay.
Sustained.
Were you given instructions by Detective Van Adder to just collect one stain at Rockingham and then move on to Bundy?
No.
Were you ever informed that there was a plan for the criminalists first to go to Bundy, just collect a red stain off the Bronco, and then move as quickly as possible to Bundy?
Call for hearsay.
Sustained.
All right, may we approach for a minute?
Sure, with the reporter. All right, ladies and gentlemen, obviously you are to disregard any disruptions in the audience. I think that particular incident spoke for itself. Hold on. Mr. Schick.
Thank you. Mr. Fung, when you arrived at the Rockingham crime scene, did Detective Van Adder tell you that Detective Lang was waiting for you at Bundy?
I don't specifically recall if he mentioned it was Detective Lang himself, but he did mention there was another scene at Bundy.
Right. And did he tell you that at that scene there were, it was a double homicide and there were two victims' bodies there?
Yes.
And was there a discussion of the need to arrive at Bundy before the coroners? For the criminalists to get there before the coroners?
No.
Generally speaking, isn't it certainly desirable for the criminalists to arrive at a homicide scene before the coroners?
From my point of view,
Yes.
yes.
And the reason that you want to arrive at a homicide scene before the coroners is you want an opportunity to examine the scene and the evidence at the scene before the bodies are removed.
Yes.
And that's because you want to be able to document that scene in its original condition as best you can.
That's preferable that that is done, yes.
So you want to be able to take measurements?
Yes,
You want to be able to direct the forensic photographer about where to take pictures?
yes,
You want to be able to preserve fragile trace evidence as best you can?
yes,
Collect it in such a way that the integrity of the evidence is preserved?
if necessary, yes,
Get to that crime scene before anybody walks through it who is not required to be there?
yes.
So when you arrived at Rockingham now, you're telling us you didn't know when the first officer had arrived at the scene at Bundy, is that right?
Yes,
But did you have an idea of how many hours it was without knowing the precise times? How many hours the victims had been at Bundy without any criminalists arriving at the scene?
Your Honor, that calls for speculation and hearsay.
Oh,
I only knew that the crime scene from Bundy was from the night before, in the early morning hours or the night before.
So you knew it was the early morning hours, and now you were arriving at Rockingham at around 7:15, 7:20.
Object, that misstates the testimony.
sustained. Again.
Now, in your discussion with the Detective Van Adder, did he express any urgency to you that you should finish your work at Rockingham quickly to get to Bundy?
He did inform me that I did have another crime scene at Bundy, but he didn't rush me along, no.
Well, did he tell you that, did he indicate to you in any way that it would not be a good idea to take a very long time at Rockingham because you might not be able to get to the Bundy scene before the coroners? Did he express that concern to you?
I don't recall that.
Did you have that concern?
Yes,
Did you express that concern to him?
I don't recall if I did or not.
Did you tell Detective Van Adder that you thought you might need some extra help because you had these two crime scenes?
I believe I asked him if he wanted another team.
You asked him that.
I think I did.
And you asked him if he wanted another team because you believed that it was important to get criminalists to Bundy as soon as possible.
It was a resource available to him if he wanted it.
Well, you thought it was important to get a set of criminalists to Bundy as soon as possible, didn't you? As you were talking with Detective Van Adder when you first arrived at that scene.
I left it up to his discretion.
He told you that that wasn't necessary?
He never said that.
Well, did he say, no, we don't need the help? The extra help?
I don't recall if he ever said that.
Well, do you have any recollection as to how he responded to your suggestion that it would be a good idea to get some backup to get another team to Bundy?
It's irrelevant. I'll just say.
Sustained.
Before you spoke to Detective Van Adder, you placed a call to SID, did you not?
Yes, I did.
To notify supervisors.
Yes.
And that's because you thought that this was a case that required immediate notification of supervisors.
Yes.
And when you placed that call at 7:15, you knew that there were two crime scenes?
I don't know if it was exactly at 7:15, but I knew that there were two crime scenes when I made the call.
All right. Well, did you call SID and speak to a woman named Lisa Scipetta, or Sibetta, somebody from toxicology? Remember of making a first call to her?
I believe my first call was to criminalist Flaherty in toxicology.
You were looking for a supervisor.
Yes, I was.
You were looking for Michelle Kessler.
Yes, I was.
She's the head of the laboratory, or was the acting head at that time?
She was a co-acting.
Co-acting head? All right. But you were looking to talk with her, were you not?
I was looking to speak with a supervisor.
Right, because you, and that's because, well, you tell us. What was it that was going on in your mind that led you to call for a supervisor before you even arrived at the Rockingham scene?
There are guidelines within our laboratory that if there is a high-profile case or a double or triple homicide, something like that, that supervisors be notified.
Those were the policies you and I discussed yesterday. Press, unusual case. Do you remember discussing those?
Yes.
All right. Have you ever seen a written handout in the manual with respect to those policies?
No, I haven't.
Well, moving on. So you felt the need to call for the supervisor at 7:15 before you spoke to Detective Van Adder, right?
Before I spoke
Yes,
to him?
before you spoke to Detective Van Adder, you made this first call to SID looking for Michelle Kessler.
No,
That first notification call was not before you spoke to Detective Van Adder?
it was after.
It was after?
Yes.
Didn't you also then have a conversation at 7:50 with Greg Matheson?
In that time frame, yes.
And at that time, and he was a supervisor, was he not?
Yes, he was.
And you had this conversation
Or
with
is.
Greg Matheson after you spoke with Detective Van Adder.
Yes.
We'll get to that conversation in a minute. But going back to your initial conversation with Detective Van Adder, did he tell you that you would have to be doing some processing of the Bronco,
Yes.
and that the Bronco was part of the crime scene?
Yes.
And after this, and that was after you realized that after this initial conversation you had with Detective Van Adder, right? That you would have to deal with the Bronco.
Yes.
And you didn't know that before you arrived at the scene, did you?
That's correct.
And it was after your conversation, your initial conversation with Detective Van Adder, that you realized that Andrea Mazzola could not act as the, quote, officer in charge of this case.
I thought it more prudent that I be the officer in charge.
I think your phrase on direct examination is that after your conversation with Detective Van Adder, you realized that Ms. Mazzola should take something of a backseat. Was those your words?
Yes.
All right. And you gave that explanation on direct examination that prior to going to the scene, when you were filling out your crime scene checklist, Andrea Mazzola's name was written in as officer in charge before you got there. Remember that?
Yes.
And that was because you thought that she was going to be the officer in charge on this homicide case until you arrived at the scene and spoke with Detective Van Adder, right?
Yes.
All right. But it was after your conversation with Detective Van Adder that you first realized that you would have to be doing a vehicle search of the Bronco, correct?
Yes.
Sir, would you please turn to your, you have a form that's known as a vehicle checklist, correct?
Yes.
And you filled one out with respect to the search of the Bronco, did you not?
One was filled out, yes.
Do you have that before you?
Yes, I do.
Could you turn to the first page of it?
Yes.
All right.
Certainly.
Now, this vehicle checklist form, was that withdrawn? On this vehicle checklist form, there is also a box that indicates who is the officer in charge of the vehicle search, correct?
Yes.
And on that box, it's listed as Andrea Mazzola as being the officer in charge of the vehicle search, correct?
Yes.
So, are you sure that you hadn't given up the idea that maybe Miss Mazzola would still be sort of acting as the officer in charge when you got to Rockingham?
I don't understand
All right.
your question.
You told us the only reason that Andrea Mazzola's name was written in as the officer in charge on the Rockingham checklist is that it was filled out before you got to the scene, right? That's what you said on direct.
That was the reason why she was put in the officer in charge space, yes.
All right. But after you'd gotten to the scene, and after you first learned that you would have to be searching the Bronco, Andrea Mazzola was still listed on the vehicle checklist form as the officer in charge, right?
Yes.
Now, we had some discussion yesterday about the use of this word trainee with respect to Ms. Mazzola. You recall that?
Yes.
All right. And you don't like the description of Ms. Mazzola as a trainee. You don't think that's fair to describe her on June 13th as a trainee. Is that right?
Overruled.
I think a better description of her is criminalist one.
Criminalist one. But in terms of her level of experience, you don't feel that it's, what word would you like to use? If not trainee, would you feel more comfortable with the word novice? That she was a novice in processing crime scenes?
Sorry.
It's vague, too.
All right. We understand that when you hire on at SID, you automatically, day one on the job, you're a criminalist one, right?
If you're hired in that capacity, yes.
Right. So when you get on the job, you're immediately a criminalist one. Fair to say?
Yes.
All right. But being a criminalist one doesn't tell one much about the level of experience that you have, correct?
In regard to,
How many crime scenes you've processed, what you know.
that's correct.
And so it's a period. Would you say that the course of there's a course of training as a criminalist one that one goes through in terms of experience?
Yes.
You learn by experience.
Yes.
And in terms of learning by experience, Ms. Mazzola was at the very beginning of this process. Fair enough?
She was at the beginning, yes.
Would it be fair to call her a rookie in processing crime scenes?
Sustained. Why don't you just try entry level?
Well, I'm looking for a word that the witness is comfortable with, Your
Well,
Honor, and I'm just
rookie
trying
is
to get
something
one.
that there have been rookies of the year who've been MVPs.
Sure thing. Well, would you call her a novice?
Your Honor, it's argument.
Entry level? Is that, how about that?
Yes.
She's an entry-level person at the beginning of her learning by experience process, at the beginning of it.
She's starting it, yes.
She was starting out.
Yes.
Now, did you tell Detective Van Adder, when you were having this discussion with him about whether help was needed, that Ms. Mazzola was this entry-level person who was starting out?
Your Honor, it's irrelevant.
Overruled.
I don't recall that, no.
You didn't tell him.
I don't recall if I did or not.
You meaning you're not sure?
I'm not sure.
Did you feel that you had a responsibility to tell him that the person that you arrived with at the crime scene was an entry-level person that was starting out?
No.
Well, when you were making your suggestion to Detective Van Adder that you might need some help in this case, didn't you think it appropriate to tell him that one of the reasons you needed help is that you were with a person that was entry-level and just starting out?
No.
Were you reluctant to tell that to Detective Van Adder?
No.
Were you at all intimidated by Detective Van Adder?
No.
You were at all reluctant to question his judgments?
No.
When he turned down your suggestion that you ought to get some extra help in this case, were you reluctant to question that decision?
Sustained.
Well, you made the suggestion that extra help might be necessary.
I asked him if another team, if he wanted another team.
Right? And you, as I think you just told us, and one of the reasons was you knew there were two crime scenes.
Yes.
And you were concerned about getting the criminalists to Bundy before the coroners.
Not, that wasn't the specific reason, no.
Well, that was one reason. Didn't you just tell us that? That was one reason?
I don't think I said that, no.
No? Well, when you made this suggestion that more help might be necessary to Detective Van Adder, did he just ignore that suggestion? Not respond to you at all?
No.
He didn't ignore it?
No, he didn't.
He said, no, we don't need any extra help?
I believe he said something to the effect that he preferred that one team handle both crime scenes so that the chain of custody would not be messed up.
That's what he said?
Something to that effect.
All right. And when he said that, did you then respond to him, well, we have a situation here where one of the people I'm working with is entry level, just starting out? You say that to him at that point?
No.
Did you express any concern to him that whatever worries he had about chain of custody, it was still more important to get another team of criminalists to Bundy before the coroners arrived?
I did not say that to him.
Do you have that concern when he said to you, No, I just want to continue with one team. Did you have that concern?
I had checked the student's background. Maybe I could be heard about that. Explain it.
Or well, you can answer the question.
Could you repeat the question again?
Yeah. When Detective Van Adder, maybe we have the court reporter repeat the question so you can get it exactly as I asked it the first
Now,
time.
were you concerned at that time that it was important for a criminalist to arrive at the Bundy scene before the coroners moved the body?
Not at that time.
No. Now, were you worried when Detective Van Adder turned down your suggestion that other criminalists be called in to help? Were you worried about the fact that you were working with this person who was entry level and starting out?
No.
Were you worried that when you were working with a person who's entry level and starting out, that processing the crime scene would be slower?
State, Your Honor.
Or well,
That is not necessarily the case.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead. Are you finished?
When two people are working, sometimes it goes faster.
But when you're working with, had you ever worked with Andrea Mazzola before this day?
Yes, I had.
How many crime scenes had you done with her?
One.
How long ago was that?
That was 2 days before.
2 days before you did a crime scene with Andrea Mazzola?
Yes.
Where she collected evidence?
Where we were working as a team, yes.
Where she collected evidence. You did a crime scene 2 days before with Andrea Mazzola. You sure of that?
Yes.
Now, you had no concern, were you worried, withdrawn, when you're working with a person who's entry level and starting out, don't you feel it's required for you to observe what she's doing more than you would if it were some other criminalist 2 or 3?
Yes.
So wouldn't the need to observe what this entry-level person was doing make processing the crime scene slower?
Not necessarily.
Well, if you have to observe her, you can't be off doing something else.
That's correct.
And you don't think that would make it slower?
Where I would lose time in one area, I could make up time in another area because there are two people there.
Well, if there were 2 people there, both of whom were trained, it would go faster, right?
Not necessarily.
No? Were you worried that working with an entry-level person in a high-profile case would put a lot of pressure on her?
Was I worried about it?
Yeah.
I was aware of it.
Were you worried about it?
I'll object, it's irrelevant. But it is irrelevant.
sustained.
Were you worried that working with an entry-level person in this kind of a high-profile case when you were at Rockingham would put more pressure on you?
Objection irrelevant.
Overruled.
That was not a concern to me at that time.
Didn't cross your mind?
I didn't think about it, no.
Were you concerned that working with an entry-level person in this kind of case would produce a greater chance of mistakes? Was that a concern of yours that morning at Rockingham?
That would be for any case, not just for a high-profile case. If there's an entry-level person or a person just starting out, I would watch them more closely than someone who is experienced.
So in your mind, that morning at Rockingham, you realize that working with an entry-level person, there was a greater chance of mistakes, right? That's what you just said?
Yes.
All right. And weren't you concerned when Detective Van Adder turned down your request for help that there was a greater chance of mistakes because you were working with an entry-level person and this was a high-profile case?
Got a lot of factors in there. Could we go through them one at a time?
Sure. Asking you, we agree that you knew when Detective Van Adder turned down your suggestion for extra help that this was a high-profile case, right? You knew that.
Yes.
You knew that you had to go to another crime scene where there was a double homicide.
Yes.
You knew that there would be press people at these crime scenes.
I didn't know that. I assumed there would be.
You anticipated it, didn't you?
Yes.
You anticipated that there would be police brass at these scenes watching your every movement.
Not necessarily, no.
Didn't anticipate that?
What do you mean by brass?
Higher-ups in the police department at the scene watching.
Say it's higher ups.
Sustained.
All right. High-level officers in the police department, people of high rank. Did you anticipate that they may come to the scenes?
Still,
Over.
People of high rank can always come to a scene.
Well, didn't you anticipate they would be coming to these two scenes?
They could have come, yes.
Well, I'm asking you what your state of mind was. Didn't you anticipate that was going to happen here?
I knew it was a possibility.
All right. So, putting these factors together, she's an entry-level person. It's a high-profile case. There'll be press at the scenes. There'll be high-ranking people at the scenes. Didn't you become concerned when Detective Van Adder refused your request for extra help that there would be a greater possibility of mistakes here because you were using an entry-level person?
It assumes that one fact is not in evidence as well. Also misstates one piece of the evidence.
Maybe the word refused is a problem here. Detective Van Adder did not take your suggestion for extra help, right?
I did not suggest to him.
You made a suggestion to Detective Van Adder that extra help was needed, right?
No,
He said,
You asked him if he wanted extra help,
yes,
all right? And he told you no.
that's correct.
We're focusing on that moment. Now, at that moment, reviewing the factors again, entry-level person, press case, high-ranking officers at the scene, didn't you think at that moment that there was going to be a greater chance of mistakes being made unless you got extra help?
Your Honor, same objections.
overruled.
I don't recall thinking about that when I was at the scene.
All right. Madam Court Reporter, what's your status? Can you finish the hour? Proceed.
Sure. Do you think it was a mistake not to follow up with Detective Van Adder and say, Detective Van Adder, I think that we really ought to get more help in this case? Push him a little harder?
Argument has to be answered.
Have you discussed this case with Detective Van Adder since June 13th?
Yes.
Have you discussed with Detective Van Adder this issue of telling him that you were at the scene with an entry-level person?
No.
That hasn't arisen.
I don't recall discussing that with him.
Has Detective Van Adder ever criticized you for not telling him that you were there at the scene with an entry-level person?
I checked, this states the evidence.
Stay.
Did Detective Van Adder ever tell you that he didn't think an entry-level person was the kind of person he would like working on this case?
Did he ever state that?
Yes, did he ever state that to you?
No.
Now, Detective Van Adder asked you to process a red stain on the Bronco,
Yes.
and he told you that the Bronco was part of the crime scene.
Yes.
But there was no yellow tape around that Bronco, was there?
That's correct.
And there should have been.
Not necessarily.
Wasn't it proper to have a yellow tape surrounding that Bronco so that nobody could get to it, secure it as being within the crime scene?
It is not absolutely necessary to put up yellow tape to denote a crime scene.
Well, isn't it appropriate to put up yellow tape to surround important items of evidence to make sure people don't approach it and touch it?
If the circumstances require it, yes.
Well, in your judgment, didn't the circumstances require putting a yellow tape around that Bronco to preserve the integrity of that important piece of evidence?
In the morning?
That morning,
No.
you didn't think so?
No.
Well, weren't they asking you to take a red stain off the door handle of that Bronco?
Yes.
Didn't you tell us on direct examination that you looked into that Bronco and you saw what you thought were bloodstains in the Bronco?
Yes.
And did anybody express concern to you that later that Bronco was going to have to processed for fingerprints?
Yes.
And you didn't think it was appropriate at that time to put a yellow tape around that Bronco to make sure people didn't walk over and touch that car?
At that,
The testimony is the word appropriate.
Overruled.
at that time in the morning, there was virtually nobody out in the neighborhood. And it was very quiet, and yellow tape may have attracted even more people. So that the use of it wasn't necessary. There was nobody around.
Isn't it true that investigators are supposed to adhere to the criminalist's advice and direction relating to the gathering of evidence?
Yes.
That's been a longstanding policy in the Los Angeles Police Department, hasn't it?
Yes.
You're aware of a memo from a person named Daryl Gates? You ever seen a memo by Daryl Gates about this issue?
I don't recall the exact memo, but I am aware of one that touches that topic.
You have that manual. Let's see if I can. Who is Daryl Gates? I'm not from around here.
Daryl Gates is the previous police chief.
He was a police chief here for a long time, wasn't he?
Yes.
And to your knowledge, in your 8 years at SID, has there ever been any conflict between criminalists who go to investigate the scenes and the detectives who are in charge of the scenes in terms of proper procedures for collecting evidence?
Irrelevant.
Overruled.
I've been with SID for 10 years,
I'm sorry.
And I am not aware of conflicts, as you have stated.
In your 10 years at SID, you've never had a disagreement with the detective at a crime scene as to how evidence should be gathered?
That's irrelevant, Your Honor.
Overruled.
In my experience?
Yeah.
In my experience, I will make my suggestions.
Excuse me, Mr. Scheck, you're going to have to stand someplace where you don't block the jury's view.
Oh, I'm very sorry.
Thank you.
In my experience, I will make my suggestions to the detective, and I have always had the detectives cooperate with my suggestions.
Well, that didn't happen in this case, did it?
How do you mean?
Well, you made a suggestion to Detective Van Adder that you were going to need more help, and he didn't take it.
Sustain.
Maybe it's easy. Give me a minute, Your Honor. I thought it's
Certainly.
easy to find it in my book. Show you that document. Have you ever seen that document before?
Yes.
And that's a document concerning the relative responsibilities of the investigators and the criminalists.
Yes.
All right? And it indicates that the investigators are supposed to adhere to the criminalist's advice.
I don't think it's proper for counsel to read the document.
Sustain.
Right? Is it your understanding that investigators are supposed to adhere to the criminalist's advice and direction relating to the gathering of evidence?
Specifically with relating to the gathering of evidence?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. And you're familiar with the Los Angeles Department Police Manual, are you not?
I haven't committed it to memory.
Are you familiar with any requirement that it is the responsibility of people from SID to instruct all officers in the department regarding current methods of collecting, marking, and preserving physical evidence?
I don't know what section you're reading that from.
But, yes. But it sounds, does that sound to you like your responsibility? Your understanding of what your responsibility is?
It's not relevant.
Overruled. You can answer the question.
Yes.
Now, you were saying to us that you didn't think it was necessary to put up a yellow tape to protect the Bronco in the morning
Yes.
because you didn't think that there were a lot of people on the street in the morning.
Yes.
Well, didn't you anticipate that later in the day there would be people going to that scene?
Yes.
I mean, you knew at this point that one of the victims in this case was the former wife of Mr. Simpson.
Vegas is
Sustain.
At 7:15, when you arrived at Rockingham, you knew that one of the victims in this case was Mr. Simpson's ex-wife.
No.
Did you know that you were at Mr. Simpson's house?
I knew that was his residence.
Did you know that Detective Van Adder regarded Mr. Simpson as a suspect?
I don't recall if he relayed that to me or not.
He might have.
He might have.
All right. And is it your testimony that you did not anticipate that as the day went on, that people would be going to that Rockingham residence and would be around that scene?
I anticipated that the Bronco would have been towed away and put into impound.
You were at Rockingham from around 7, was it 15 or 7:20?
7:10.
7:10 in the morning until you left at what time? Around 10:15? 10 o'clock?
I left Rockingham at approximately 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock. So you're there 2 hours and 50 minutes. I think I've got that one right.
2 hours and 50 minutes, yes.
And during that 2 hours and 50 minutes, were more people arriving at the scene and watching what was going on?
No,
In those 3 hours, when you left, there was no yellow tape on that, surrounding that Bronco, right?
that's correct.
And didn't it occur to you that that was not a sound procedure as you left Rockingham?
2 officers were in charge of protecting that evidence, and yellow tape is not it's not as good a protection as an actual officer.
Isn't the best possible protection the standard protection to have yellow tapes and officers?
That is one method.
Isn't it true that, withdrawn, was it your decision as to whether or not a yellow tape should be put around that Bronco?
No,
Well, aren't you the person that's supposed to essentially be calling the shots with respect to how evidence is gathered?
with respect to how evidence is gathered, yes.
Well, isn't the protection of important items of evidence within that province, the gathering of evidence, protecting it with yellow tape?
That, in my opinion, that is under the purview of the officer in charge of the scene.
So that's not your decision, that's the officer's decision.
Yes,
And that's why you didn't question it? Because it was their decision?
if I thought it was necessary, I would have suggested it to him.
You didn't think it was necessary?
Not at that time.
You don't think it was a mistake? Well, at what time? At what
In the morning.
time would it have been appropriate to put yellow tape around that Bronco?
When there were more people around, then it would have been more preferable.
When you left, did you make the suggestion to any officers at the scene, guys, maybe you should put some yellow tape around that Bronco soon?
Assumes
Because
facts, not in evidence.
did you? I'm asking, did you?
Guys,
Sorry?
guys.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you, when you left, God, that's right. Did you, when you left, tell any male or female officers at the scene that perhaps it was a good idea to put some yellow tape around that Bronco?
I did not state that, no.
Wasn't that a mistake?
I don't know if it was a mistake or not.
At 7:50, after your conversation with Detective Van Adder, you spoke to Greg Matheson, did you not?
Yes,
Greg Matheson is a supervisor at SID.
yes,
And at that time, did you express concern to him that you had 2 crime scenes?
yes,
Did you express concern to him that the victims at Bundy, to the best of your knowledge, had been there since the early morning hours, and you were now talking to him at 7:50 in the morning?
I did speak to him regarding the circumstances as I knew them. I don't recall the exact conversation, though.
Did you express to him a concern that the criminalists may not get to the Bundy crime scene before the coroners?
I don't think I expressed that to him, no.
Did you express to him a concern about using an entry-level person who was just starting out to do the work in this case?
I told him who was with me.
Did you tell him anything about the level of experience of Ms. Mazzola?
I don't think I had to.
And that's because you thought he had knowledge of Ms. Mazzola's experience level.
Yes.
Did you discuss with him the fact that you had suggested to Detective Van Adder that more help was needed?
I don't know if I discussed that with him or not.
Did you say to him,
I'll make a objection, and as soon as that non-evidence motion to strike the witness's testimony.
did
Misstates testimony.
you,
But the answer was such that the answer will stand.
did you suggest to Greg Matheson that more help was needed?
I don't know if I said that or not. I don't think I did.
Did he ask you if you needed more help?
He may have.
And did you say no?
At the time, I didn't think I did.
Now, maybe we could turn now to the evidence that you collected at Rockingham for a minute. You indicated that there were a number of red blood drops. Is that correct? That you observed?
Yes.
All right. Now, did you, in terms of how you and Ms. Mazzola approached this, did you perform any what's known as phenolphthalein tests on those blood drops?
Yes.
I'll object based on the earlier rulings.
Oral. Proceed.
Did you?
Yes.
And was that one of the first things you did?
It was one of the things we did.
All right. But in terms of approaching these red stains, there's one that I think is item number 1, the one on the door. Is that correct?
Yes.
And before you swatched that stain, you did a presumptive test on it?
Yes.
All right. And before you took a picture of that stain, you did a presumptive test on it?
I'm not sure which order that occurred in.
Well, with respect to the next, there's item number 4, correct? That's a red stain that you found.
Yes.
All right. Did you first go out and measure that before you took a picture of it? Measure its location?
I'm not sure if the picture was taken first or the measurement was taken first.
Did you do the presumptive test on number 4 before you took the picture?
Best of my recollection, yes.
All right. And you did that with item number 5 as well? First the presumptive test and then the picture?
I believe so.
And item number 6, I believe?
Yes.
And item number 7?
To the best of my recollection.
And item number 8?
To the best of my recollection, yes.
And incidentally, on the when you went to Bundy, and you and Ms. Mazzola were dealing with items 47, 48, 49, 50, and 52. Did you follow essentially the same process?
Essentially, yes.
So you did the presumptive tests on those items first, and then the pictures were taken?
I don't know the exact,
Could have happened that way.
yes.
Now, in terms of these red stains that you found, would you agree that the pattern of red stains that you found was leading from the residence to the Bronco or the Bronco to the front door of the residence?
Yes.
And there is, why don't we try using this, one of these diagrams first. Let me start with, let me start with one of the prosecution's boards, if I might.
Certainly. All right, Mr. Scheck, this is People's Exhibit, which?
Yes, it's People's Exhibit number 169, Rob.
All right, thank you. Proceed.
Okay, sorry for the delay. Mr. Funk, could you step down here with me for 1 minute? Now, you found item number 4, a red stain, somewhere just
Council, second, is
All right.
I'm sorry.
All right. Much better. Thank you, Mr. Douglas.
Now, you found drop number 4 on Rockingham, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
All right. And you measured that to be, I guess, 83 9 inches south of the south curb, 2 feet west of the south curb.
Yes,
Approximately where I'm pointing here on the diagram, is that correct?
approximately.
Then you found a red stain that you identified as number 5. Could you point approximately to where that is on the diagram? If it helps, you...
Referring to a sketch.
Right. In fact, is it this sketch that I have right here?
Yes.
Okay, that's the sketch that you filled out at the time that this was filled out at the time it was recovered, correct?
Yes.
All right. So if you want to come over, you can look at my sketch. I'll just hold it out for you. Okay, so approximately here, that's in front of the gate, right?
Yes.
All right. Then you found drop number 6. Could you show us where that is? Which is, okay. Now, approximately. Now, would you not agree that there were about 4 or 5 feet between drops number 4 and 5?
Approximately.
All right. And if one were to start on a line to the place that I'm pointing here, what would you describe that in terms of the gate? What direction would you describe that as being on this diagram? The northwest side of the gate?
This is northwest, I don't know.
Northwest as it's depicted on this diagram, I guess.
And you're referring to the fence or the gate?
Just the gate
The gate
on this
itself?
line, yeah. If one were to basically...
Right here would be the north end of the gate.
Okay, from the north end of the gate, if one were to walk in a line to the area where there's the garage is depicted, okay? See what I'm saying?
You're saying from here to here?
No, from here to the pathway.
From here to here.
That's right. If you were to draw a line, right, walk on a line from that entryway to the gate directly to the pathway, okay? How many feet would you estimate that roughly to be?
I don't recall the dimensions. I'd have to see something.
Has Detective Van Adder ever discussed a theory with you that Mr. Simpson came home in this case and opened the gate, all right, and then walked along the south pathway to the area where the glove was recovered?
Yeah, it's irrelevant, and it's also hearsay.
Sustain.
Well, just going on a line, all right, from where you found drop number 6, okay, to the south pathway, right?
Yes?
You didn't find, that's about, how many feet would you estimate?
I told you I couldn't give you an estimate.
Well, the distance from the gate to where the glove was recovered was approximately 250 feet.
The gate and the glove,
Yeah.
I'll have to take your word for it.
Are you
All right.
testifying, Mr. Scheck?
I asked him that question.
He said, I'll have to take what you say.
Tell you what, let's try it this way. I'd like to mark this document as the fence next in order.
1072.
Have you seen this document before, Mr. Fung?
Yes, I have.
And what is it?
This is a sketch. No, it's a surveyor's drawing of the Rockingham residence.
Right. And that gives distances with respect to how far it is from Rockingham Avenue to the garage and the guest house areas.
Yes, it does.
And that was drawn by a surveyor. You are aware of this.
Yes.
And as far as you're concerned, it's accurate.
irrelevance of what this witness is concerned about.
Sustained.
Does this person work with you at SID?
Not anymore.
Did at the time you did this?
Yes.
All right. And you were aware that this was being prepared?
For
It's Vegas to time.
that it was being, that
Yes.
eventually it would be prepared?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
also irrelevant. I make motion to strike.
Overruled.
It's part of the normal procedures at SID to, in some cases, to have such a surveyor come out and measure the scene.
In some cases, yes.
All right. And in this case, that was done.
Yes.
And it's done in the regular course of business at SID when appropriate.
Your Honor, I'd make a motion to strike. I don't think there's any foundation of personal knowledge.
Overruled.
Right? And in appropriate cases, it's in the regular course of business at SID, these kinds of surveyor's diagrams are prepared.
Yes.
And the person that prepares it, to your knowledge, has an obligation to make those measurements accurately.
Irrelevant.
Overruled.
To the best of his ability, yes.
Here, I would offer this diagram and ask to be put on the.
Your Honor,
Do the measurements on that appear to be accurate? All right. Proceed.
Okay. Now, looking at that, wouldn't you agree that the distance between the gate and where the glove was found is approximately 250 feet?
Your Honor, I object as it calls for speculation. The witness can only testify what he sees.
Sustained.
You took measurements, did you not, Mr. Fung, on June 13th?
Yes, I did.
All right. And with the, let me ask you, in terms of this diagram over here, this is I'm pointing now, and I'm now referring to people's 169. This is the garage,
Yes.
all right? And this area here, where you tell me, where is the beginning of the guest house? It's depicted in this diagram. Would it be the area I'm pointing right here?
And no personal knowledge.
Overruled.
I don't know what part is the guest.
Well, looking at the diagram on the Elmo, okay? You see a box there that indicates guest rooms.
Your Honor, it's irrelevant what he sees in regard to guest rooms.
Overruled.
Yes, I did.
All right, can you locate that for us on People's 169?
Appears to be this area here.
Where does it start? The area designated guest rooms, would that begin at the, what is marked on People's 169 as the area that says office?
This diagram appears somewhat different than the diagram up on the board.
In what respect?
There is no indentation in this area here.
All right, let the record reflect that the witness is indicating that there is an indentation between the horizontal area between what is the office and the area where there's a call out for number 14. Is that correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, for the record, I believe he indicated that there wasn't an indentation.
Yes.
There wasn't an indentation on 169, but there is one on the defense exhibit that you see projected on the Elmo,
Yes.
which is accurate.
I would have to refer to photographs or visit the scene again. I don't recall.
All right. But other than that indentation, I'm just trying to get you to tell us if where the area that is indicated as guest rooms on the diagram on the Elmo is on People's 169.
This would be very rough. Approximately in this area here.
Indicating the area by what's marked as office, is that correct?
Yes.
All right,
On 169.
on 169. Now, you and Ms. Mazzola worked together to make the measurements on June 13th.
Yes.
And you knew at that time that others would later be relying on your measurements as to where various pieces of evidence were found.
Yes.
All right. And you knew that would be important later if people were to make analyses, subsequent analyses of the scene.
Could become a factor, yes.
Just like at Bundy, you made measurements as to where the footprints were.
Yes.
And you knew that those measurements would be relied upon later for all kinds of analysis.
Possibly, yes.
Now, on June 13th, you measured the glove as being located 118 feet east of the west wall of the guest house. Now, could you show us where the west wall of the guest house is?
Guest house.
Yes.
My description of the location was 118 feet east of the west wall.
Doesn't your evidence collection sheet read, the glove under location of item 118 feet east of the west wall guest house, 1 foot 4 inches south of the south wall? Isn't that what you wrote?
That is what Criminalist Mazzola wrote, yes.
Oh, well, 100, looking at the diagram on the Elmo, 118 feet east of the west wall of the guest house, where would that be on the diagram in the Elmo?
That is not the point of reference that is referred to.
I didn't ask you that question. Where would that be?
Then it's irrelevant.
Mr. Fung, objection, that moves to strike his answer as being not responsive. My question, Mr. Fung, is where, looking at the diagram on the Elmo, would a location 118 feet east of the west wall of the guest house, 1 foot 4 inches south of the south wall be?
Objection, irrelevant.
Sustained.
Mr. Fung, the measurement here is wrong, isn't it?
As you are interpreting it, it is wrong, but from where I know the point of reference is, the measurement is correct.
Well, let's put it this way.
Very close to where it was.
Is it your testimony that the entry here of 118 feet east of the west wall of the guest house, 1 foot 4 inches south of the south wall, that entry as written is an incorrect entry?
That's incorrect.
There
Your
was no-
statement is incorrect.
Excuse me, Mr. Hall. I object. There was no testimony to that effect. Motion to strike.
Overruled. Answer will stand.
Can you answer that question?
Your interpretation of that entry is incorrect.
Well, the entry itself, if one were to measure 118 feet east of the west wall of the guest house, that would be a location that is far beyond this air conditioner, all the way somewhere into the planting area out back,
I
right?
object. That's irrelevant.
Sustained.
Well, if one were to call the guest house, as I think you previously did, this office area, is that correct? Is depicted on People's 169?
Counsel, I've sustained 4 irrelevancy objections in a row as to that question.
Are you saying that Ms. Mazzola, when she made an entry here, was incorrect?
I am not saying that.
You're saying that, well, what was the guest house then?
The guest house is the approximate location or area to locate where the glove was.
All right, so you're saying 118 feet east of the west wall of the guest house, that was your reference point?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
What are you saying?
What I am saying is the guest house in that entry depicts the general location of where the glove was. The 818 feet east of the west wall is from this point here.
So you're saying 118 feet east of the west wall, and then guest house that follows it, that is not the west wall of the guest house you're referring to?
He's misreading the,
Sustain your previous question.
Could we put up on the Elmo the entry that we're talking about, just so everybody can see it? Okay, you see where it says 118 feet east of the west wall?
wait a minute, he's not reading it correctly. It doesn't say of.
I think the document speaks for itself. You see the entry where it says location of item?
Yes, I did.
All right. Now, doesn't it read across the top line, 118 feet east of the west wall, guest house? 1 foot 4 inches south of south wall.
It does state that.
All right. So what you're telling us now is that the west wall you were referring to was not the west wall of the guest house?
The west wall I'm referring to is this wall here.
All right. So you're saying that the
Indicating
west...
wall, excuse me, indicating the wall of the garage on People's 160.
That's what I was about to, thank you, Your Honor, I was about to indicate that. So the west wall that you actually were referring to in that entry was the west wall of the garage, not the guest house.
Yes.
And if one were to read just literally what it says there, 118 feet east of the west wall of the guest house, and start measuring from the guest house, that would be an incorrect entry. An incorrect location for where the glove was.
Your Honor, that's his note.
Oh, well,
That's why they're notes, and that's why I prepare
I'm
a
just-
proper report.
I understand that that's, if one were to literally read it, that would be an incorrect identification
Your
of the
Honor,
measurement.
that's irrelevant.
well, he can answer the question. He's already
That would
answered
be
it.
an incorrect interpretation of what is there.
All right. Thank you. Few more questions while we're here. Now, if one goes on a line from where you last found drop number 6, okay, along this south wall, all right, this is a
Counsel,
driveway.
is there a wall there?
Well, it's actually shrubbery, thank you. Along this shrubbery, on a line to the south walkway, okay, that's a driveway area.
Yes, it is.
All right, on that line, you found no red stains. Right?
From approximately this point to this point, I found no red stains in this lower.
No red stains in this area, correct?
That's correct.
And for the record, perhaps,
All right, that's the area from the driveway to where the pink ends on Peoples 169.
well, for the record, it was from the Y in the word driveway over to the right hand, on this exhibit, the lower right-hand corner of where it's the pink ends. And then I think he also pointed to a point that's just above the Y in what would be sort of a triangle.
Is that Mr.
Yes.
Goldberg saying correct? All right. Now, there's now an area that's in yellow, okay?
Yes.
Now, as one walks down in the area that's yellow on Peoples 169, there's about 4 steps,
To the best of my recollection, yes.
all right? And then there's a cement area, cement walkway area,
Yes.
all right? And on June 13th, there were much fewer leaves in that cement walkway area than there was in the narrow walkway area that I'm pointing to in the area where the glove was recovered, right?
I don't recall exactly which had more more leaves. I do recall there was areas that had a lot of leaves and other areas that had less leaves, but I didn't make any note of it.
Well, in terms of there are more trees overhanging the area that I'm pointing to now that starts with, what would you call this point? How do you want to describe it? What demarcation do you want to use? This point I'm over here that's just to the left of the call-out box that's 14. That's where the electrical equipment is, electrical door.
Yeah, there's some kind of.
From the electrical door box, this is a narrow area, correct?
Yes, it is.
There's more trees overhanging that area.
To the best of my recollection.
And there were more leaves there, weren't there, on June 13th, than there was from the cement area that starts with the garage and goes up to the point where the electrical box is.
I can't recall the amount of leaves.
And you found no red stains from the point where the yellow begins on the garage on Peoples 169 to the point where you found the glove.
That is correct.
All right? None. No red stains
On the pathway itself,
on the pathway itself.
that's
And in the area of the air conditioner, there's a wall.
there is a wall, yes.
And it's made of a stucco type material.
Yes.
All right, and that stucco type material is the kind of thing where if you brush against it with clothing, if one brushes against it with clothing, threads or fibers can get stuck to it.
That's a possibility.
Or you can get an abrasion if one were to bang up against it with bare skin. That kind of stucco can cause an abrasion on one's hand.
That calls for speculation.
Or will,
Possibly.
Now, you found no hair or fiber on the stucco wall area near the air conditioner on June 13th.
That's correct.
You examined the fence in the area where the glove was recovered.
Yes, I did.
You found no fibers on that fence, no hair or fibers on that fence.
I did not see any.
You did not see any.
That's correct.
And were you considering the possibility that somebody might have gone over that fence?
Yes.
And were you considering the fact that somebody might have banged into that wall? That stucco wall.
I did look at the wall, yes.
So you were looking at that carefully because the detectives were instructing you to do so.
It's a compound question.
well, it actually calls for speculation.
Were you looking at that area? Were you instructed by the detectives to examine that area carefully?
Yes.
And you found no fibers on that stucco wall.
That's correct.
I think we're finished with this side anyway.
All right.
You know whether or not there is an automatic sprinkler system, the Simpson residence?
I don't know if there is or not.
So you wouldn't know whether or not it was dew on the lawn or water from the sprinkler system?
That's correct.
Now, you indicated on direct examination that you were the person that went back and recovered the glove, item number 9.
Yes,
And you were the person that was doing all this investigating on the walkway leading up to item number 9.
Overruled.
investigation in what sense?
Well, you were looking for red stains, you were looking for fibers, you were looking for clues along the south walkway leading up to the glove.
Yes,
And when you went to do this investigation, who accompanied you?
different people accompanied me at different times.
All right, how many times did you go there?
Approximately four that I can remember.
Who was there the first time you went?
The first time was with the walkthrough, and I don't recall whether it was Detective Furman and Detective Van Adder who were both at that walkthrough at that time, or just Detective Van Adder, or just Detective Furman. But one of the detectives did escort me back there on my walkthrough,
And this was about how long after you got to the scene?
maybe 5 minutes into the scene.
And was Miss Mazzola with you?
I don't recall if she was with me or not.
All right, how long after that did you then go back and look at that area again, walking towards the glove?
Till the next time I went to
Yeah.
that area, I don't have
About how many minutes?
I couldn't give you a good estimation.
Who went with you?
The next time was with Miss Mazzola,
Just the two of you.
to the best of my recollection.
And you were carefully walking down that path looking for evidence.
Yes,
And at that time, were you taking measurements?
yes.
All right. And you had not, how close did you get to the glove?
Within feet of it,
How many?
1 or 2 or 3.
And had you noticed the blue object on the other side of the fence that you've identified as item number 10?
I may have seen it, but I didn't identify it as being relevant evidence.
And tell us about the third time you went.
The third time I went was with the photographer.
And who was that, Mr. Rokar?
I believe so.
And when he was walking down that path, did he bang into the air conditioner?
No,
You don't recall that?
no, I don't.
All right. And that was Mr. Rokar went with you and you directed him to take a photograph.
I believe so.
And that's part of your job. You're supposed to direct the forensic photography.
Yes.
And then the fourth time you went there, you went with whom?
To the best of my recollection, it was myself. I went by myself, and Detective Furman went on the other side of the fence.
So, in other words, you were walking down the south walkway and Detective Furman was walking on the other side of the fence.
That's how I remember it.
Two of you were walking parallel?
Well, we ended up at this opposite ends of the fence, yes.
And then it was Detective Furman that pointed out this blue object on the other side of the fence?
I think he had indicated to me that there was one before that point, and he went over at that point to help me collect it so I wouldn't have to walk all the way around.
Well, wait a second. You're the criminalist, right?
Yes,
And you're saying that Detective Furman volunteered and he rushed down that south walkway. He walked down that south walkway, right?
I don't know if he rushed or walked.
All right. He was the fellow that went down there and he picked up the evidence.
At my request.
What about Miss Mazzola? You couldn't use her?
To the best of my recollection, Miss Mazzola was picking up the blood evidence 7, or the red stains 7 and 8 at that time.
Well, did you perform any measurements at that point on the, that blue item, that blue plastic item?
Yes.
Well, did you measure it? How did you do that? Did it with
It-
Detective Furman?
The plastic container was almost parallel to the glove, so I made an estimate as to its location.
And you didn't go around the fence to take a look at anything around that plastic container. You left that to Detective Furman.
Yes, I did.
But it's your job, I guess. Well, isn't it your job as the criminalist to be collecting the evidence? You're the one in charge of gathering the evidence?
I'm in charge of gathering evidence.
And did Detective Furman wear any rubber gloves when he was picking up that blue plastic bag?
I believe he used the scoop method that I also use sometimes.
Well, you're saying he didn't have gloves?
I'm saying he used a scoop method.
Well, in using the scoop method, do you know if he had gloves?
I don't know if he had gloves. I don't think he did.
Do you know one way or the other?
No, I don't. I don't think he did, though.
Well, wait a second. If you don't know one way or the other,
I'm not sure.
you don't have an independent recollection of whether he had gloves or not. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
All right.
All right.
I think it's a good time to break.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our recess for the morning session. Please remember all my admonitions to you. Don't discuss the case amongst yourselves. Form any opinions about the case. Do not conduct any deliberations till the matter has been submitted to you. Do not allow anybody to communicate with you with regard to the case. See you back here at 1:30. Mr. Fung, you may step down. You're ordered to be here 1:30. All right, we'll stand in recess, 1:30. Before we invite the jurors to rejoin us. All right, counsel, today we're going to go to 3:15 for our break. Change court reporters, go to 4, and then take up the motions regarding coroner's reports at about 4:10. All right, let's have the jurors, please. Let the record reflect, we've now been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Fung, would you resume the witness stand, please? All right, Mr. Dennis Fung is again on the witness stand, undergoing cross-examination by Mr. Scheck. Good afternoon again, Mr. Fung.
Good afternoon.
You're reminded you were still under oath, sir. And Mr. Scheck, you may resume your cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Good afternoon, Mr. Fung.
Morning.
Mr. Fung, when we left, you were telling us about Detective Furman collecting item number 10. I think you told us yesterday, did you not, that he transferred that, he handed that to you over the fence?
Yes.
All right. But your recollection now is not very clear on exactly whether he used the scoop method or gloves.
Sustain. Raise the question.
Do you have a clear recollection as to whether or not Detective Furman had gloves?
No.
And do you have a clear recollection as to whether he used the scoop method?
No.
And Is it your testimony that he picked this item up and he handed it to you over that fence? Is that how it happened, or do you recall?
It was in a coin envelope, and he handed it to me over the fence.
So it was one of those little coin envelopes?
Yes.
All right. And given the fact that it's a little coin envelope, would it not be difficult to be using the scoop method with the coin envelope?
Also speculation.
Sustain.
Well, ordinarily, would you use the scoop method with one of those small coin envelopes?
I've done it before.
It's fairly difficult, isn't it, as opposed to a large paper bag?
No.
No?
It is more difficult, but it's not a lot more difficult.
Okay, so it's more difficult.
A little bit, yes.
And this, ask this photograph be marked as defendant's next in order,
1073.
1073.
All right, defense 1073.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
Mr. Fung, is this a photograph of item number 10 as you saw it on the morning of June 13th?
Yes.
May I put this on the Elmo, Your Honor? Mr. Fung, given the location of that item number 10, if one were to use the scoop method there, you might get some leaves or debris into the coin envelope.
Perhaps.
Perhaps, don't you think that's likely given its location?
Not necessarily, no.
No? And to the best of your recollection, there are no leaves in that coin envelope, are there?
To the best of my recollection, yeah, there are no leaves in the.
All right. So, if Detective Furman were to have used gloves and picked that up and put it into the coin envelope, it would be less likely to have leaves in it, wouldn't you think?
It's irrelevant.
Calls for speculation.
Mr. Fung, let's move on to the Bundy crime scene. You arrived there about what time?
I arrived there at 10:15 in the morning.
And before you got there, did it come to your attention that a still photographer had already been on the scene and had taken pictures?
Yes.
And there was... about the brown men's leather glove that you observed at the Bundy location.
Yes.
And you were shown some pictures of that.
Yes.
All right. And I'm at line 8, page 337. Question. Was one of those items a brown man's... $377. Question.
I don't know whether the court has access to a transcript, but I would object to this as improper impeachment.
Over at sidebar, with the report. And the transcript.
Try one other thing that maybe can avoid this problem. I'd ask that this photograph be marked defendant's next in order. Mr. Fung, have you ever seen this photograph?
I've seen photographs like it, but I don't recall if I've seen that particular photograph.
Have you ever seen a photograph depicting the glove at Bundy that included a person pointing at it?
I don't recall.
All right. Mr. Fung, we're now back to the grand jury pages. We asked these questions.
All right, with the court reporter. Thank you, counsel. Proceed.
Mr. Fung, why don't we try this with Peoples 55? Have you seen this photograph before?
Before today,
Yes.
I don't recall seeing that particular photograph. I do recognize the location, though.
Recognize the location as being the Bundy crime scene?
Yes.
And based on other photographs that you say you're familiar with, would it be your view that this is a photograph of Detective Furman pointing at the Bundy glove?
That would call for speculation, Your Honor.
Based on the other photographs he says he's aware of.
Overruled.
I can't make out if that's Detective Furman or not.
But you see it as some individual pointing at that glove, right?
Yes.
Right. And I take it, just looking at the Bundy crime scene as it's depicted in this photograph, this is not in exactly the same form. This crime scene is not in exactly the same condition as when you first saw it on June 13th.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, you have permission for Mr. Harris to put this on the Elmo and
Okay, hold on just a second. We need to,
cut the feed. And, I ask
Mr. Goldberg, do you want to warn any family members?
Well, he's going
All right.
to focus in on a segment of this photograph.
Much as I trust Mr. Harris, just as a forewarning.
I know what it is.
All right.
Okay, Mr. Fung, you can see the photograph that's People's 55 in Edmonds.
Yes.
All right. Now, do you see a piece of paper in this photograph that you did not see when you arrived at the Bundy crime scene on June 13th?
I don't know what you're referring to.
You don't?
I mean, is there something in particular you want me to?
Yes. Ryder, I'm going to attempt to use the telescreen. Actually, I think I'm better off having Mr. Harris.
All right. How about you put the arrow at the item that you're directing Mr. Fung's
Yes.
attention to?
Do you see where the arrow is pointing, Mr. Fung?
Yes.
All right. Does that appear to you to be a piece of paper?
Yes.
All right. You didn't see that piece of paper when you arrived at the Bundy crime scene, did you?
I don't recall if I saw it or not.
Did you recover that piece of paper?
No.
Given the location of that piece of paper in relation to the crime scene, do you believe that it might have some relevance?
Objection. Calls for speculation.
Sustained.
In your view, as a criminalist, if you had seen that piece of paper at the Bundy crime scene, would you have collected it as relevant evidence?
I might have.
Might have?
Yes.
Well, that piece of paper is close to the envelope.
Yes.
It is close to the body of Miss Nicole Brown Simpson.
Yes.
That is the what is being obliterated by the post-it on the right-hand side of the picture, correct?
Yes.
All right. And You would have collected it, would you not? Because it could have the shoe impression on it of one of the assailants.
If I had seen, assuming that I had seen the paper, I would have made a determination whether it would have been a good piece of evidence that would likely to have had some type of significance to it.
Right? If you had been at the scene, if you had seen that piece of paper, you would have examined it to see if it had shoe impressions.
Possibly, yes. Look
Possibly?
for possible shoe impressions.
Possibly, you would have looked at it, right?
Yes.
For that purpose. That would be one of the purposes.
That is one of the purposes.
All right.
Yes.
You would also want to see, if you had been able to, whether or not that piece of paper had any writing on it.
Your Honor, I object. This is irrelevant.
Overruled.
Yes.
In terms of basic crime scene reconstruction, would you have considered the possibility that that piece of paper could have been ripped out of the hands of a killer?
Possibly.
It would be important to examine, in your judgment, that piece of paper for fingerprints.
Yes. In the state that appears in the picture, yes.
And from the point of view of a criminalist, sir, it was a mistake not to collect that piece of paper.
Your Honor, I'll object because there's no foundation that is sought.
You're seeing it now.
Overruled. You can answer the question.
Possibly, yes.
Serious mistake.
It could have been a
Objection.
mistake.
That's argument. Motion is struck.
No, he's answered the question. Proceed.
So you've admitted, yes, it's a mistake.
Your Honor, I object.
Sustain. Rephrase the question.
Is there any question in your mind, Mr. Fung, that if you had been at this crime scene and seen that piece of paper where it was located, that you would have attempted to collect it with great care? Any question?
Your Honor, perhaps the
I-
witness needs to look at it, but what about better resolution?
Overruled.
Well, I had one.
Can I answer?
Answer.
Looking at the picture and the condition of the paper, I probably would have collected it.
You're saying probably. My question to you, is there any doubt whatsoever in your mind that you would have picked up that piece of paper if you'd been there to see it?
Argument.
Overruled.
I don't know.
You don't know?
That's argumentative.
When you examined the crime scene later, Mr. Fung, you observed a Bonita Ecuador label, did you not?
Yes, I did.
And can you point out where in the photograph that Bonita Ecuador label was?
Your Honor, it may be necessary to see the rest of the photograph.
Overruled. Can you tell from this photograph where that label was?
In a general sense, yes.
Can you give us a general sense of where it was located?
It was located someplace near the center of the walkway.
Mr. Harris has a roving arrow, and perhaps you could direct it.
Lower, over more to the right. In that area someplace.
Okay, can we make a mark? All right. Now, that is the location where you found the Bonita, Ecuador label.
Around there, yes.
All right. And you collected that.
Yes.
You thought that was relevant evidence.
I collected that at the request of Detective Lang.
So Detective Lang thought that was relevant evidence.
Yes.
Did you agree with his judgment?
I didn't question it.
You didn't question it.
That's correct.
And generally speaking, Mr. Fung, you don't question the judgment of the homicide detectives, do you?
It's a little overbroad.
Sustained.
So you picked up the Bonita, Ecuador label, but you're telling us you're not sure whether or not you would have picked up the piece of paper in that photograph?
It's argument.
Sustained.
Okay, I guess we'll print that out and mark this. Maybe, should we put a BE over that little spot as Bonita, Ecuador?
Your Honor, I don't know whether the illustrator does this, but I think it's important for the record to indicate what section of the photograph is blocked off. I don't know if that's done
Yes.
once they print it out.
It'll be on the print.
All right. Proceed.
Now, Mr. Fung, what is trace evidence?
Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, we need to mark this. Why don't we make, since it is a copy of the People's Exhibit, let's make this 55A. $55B? All right, 55B.
Okay.
A and B, great, all right. Mr. Schechter.
What, in your judgment, is trace evidence? How do you define that term?
Trace evidence. Examples of trace evidence are hair, fiber, paint, chips of glass, mineral, soil, that type of thing.
Well, would you agree that trace evidence can be thought of as evidence occurring in sizes so small that it can be transferred between two surfaces without being noticed?
Some forms of trace evidence, yes.
Many forms.
Yes.
Hairs,
Yes.
fibers.
Yes.
And how do you define transfer evidence?
I've heard the term, but I can't give you the exact definition. I'd
Well,
have to look it up.
Would you agree that transfer evidence, strictly speaking, is evidence which is exchanged as a result of contact between two objects?
That can be one definition, yes.
And trace evidence, small hairs and fibers, can often be transfer evidence as well. In other words,
Yes.
yes. And that's something that you as a criminalist are very concerned about. Trace evidence.
Only for mine.
Well,
I am concerned with trace evidence, yes.
When you approach a crime scene, you're very concerned about trace evidence because it is fragile
Yes.
and because it can be easily transferred from one object to the other if the criminalist or others on the scene are not careful.
Yes.
And there is something known as secondary transfer. Is there not?
I've heard that term also.
And would secondary transfer refer to a situation where trace evidence could get on a person's clothing or, let's say, a towel, for example, then be transferred to another location and fall off on another object of evidence? That would be a secondary transfer.
Yes.
And as a criminalist, you are very concerned about not contaminating a crime scene with trace evidence by way of a secondary transfer.
If it is a crime scene where trace evidence is of significance, yes.
This was a crime scene where trace evidence was significant.
Certain aspects of the crime scene were important for trace evidence, yes.
The small area at Bundy where the two victims were found, that area was one of concern with respect to trace evidence.
Areas of that, areas within what you described were very important for trace evidence, yes.
Very important.
Very.
Very important in terms of the clothes of the victims.
Yes.
Very important in terms of that glove that was found at Bundy.
Yes.
Very important in terms of that knit hat.
Yes.
Very important in terms of all the physical objects that surrounded the victims in that very small enclosed crime scene.
That's totally right.
Overruled.
Some items of evidence tend to be more useful for trace evidence than others.
Well, these were items that you anticipated as soon as you got there would be important in terms of trace evidence.
Too vague.
Sustained.
The glove, the hat, the clothing of the victims, the objects surrounding the victims. As soon as you arrived at the crime scene and saw all of that, you knew these objects would be important in terms of collecting them for trace evidence.
Still vague and overbroad as to the
Sustained.
objects.
When you say objects all around, I mean, that's way too vague. Just stick with the specifics.
We'll stick with the specifics. Thank you, Your Honor. The glove, the hat, the clothing of the victims, all those were important in terms of trace evidence.
Yes.
Now, when you arrived at the crime scene, you saw that there was a blanket over the body of Nicole Brown Simpson.
I don't know, I don't recall being there that soon. When I got there, the body of Miss Simpson was being processed.
When was the first time you saw the blanket?
I saw the blanket when it was on the ground.
It was on the ground in the area where Miss Simpson's body was.
Yes.
And you came to learn in your investigation that day that the blanket had been used to cover the body.
Yes.
And you came to learn that that blanket had come from the home of Nicole Brown Simpson.
I did not know that.
Have you found that out?
Since then, yes.
And did you make any inquiry on that day about where that blanket had come from?
No, I didn't.
And would you agree, sir, that a blanket of that kind is a possible source of secondary transfer?
Possibly.
And that if Mr. Simpson had been in that home and been sitting, lying on that blanket, his hairs could be in that blanket.
Possible speculation.
Sustained.
Well, within your expertise, is that the kind of blanket that if somebody were sitting on it, lying on it, one would expect to find hairs that they had shed on the blanket.
Objection, calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Well, in your expertise as a criminalist, do you have to make judgments about different kinds of items that can be sources of possible secondary transfer?
Yes.
You have to worry about such objects being brought into crime scenes.
Yes.
You have to be worried about such objects being brought into crime scenes because they can be a source of contamination.
Yes.
And if this blanket had hairs from Mr. Simpson, that could have been brought to the crime scene by way of putting the blanket there.
Same objection.
Sustained.
To a hypothetical question. Assuming that Mr. Simpson had been in the home at Bundy and on a number of occasions had sat or lay on that blanket and shed hairs on that blanket, and then that blanket was taken and put right in the middle of this crime scene, in your expert opinion, could that be a source of cross-contamination of Mr. Simpson's hairs to this crime scene?
Your Honor, I make the same objection. Can we approach?
Yes, with the court reporter. Mr. Cochran, not this case.
We'll see.
All right. All right, thank you, counsel. Proceed. And I think I've already instructed the jury as to hypothetical questions.
Thank you. Mr. Fung again. Assuming that Mr. Simpson had been in the Bundy residence, had sat or lay on that blanket, shed hairs on that blanket, and that blanket was taken, put in the middle of this crime scene, could that, in your expert opinion, be a source of secondary transfer of his hairs to the crime scene?
It's possible.
Possible?
Yes.
All right. And that would be what is known as contamination of the crime scene.
Yes.
And if Mr. Simpson or any of his children or Miss Nicole Brown Simpson had been in Mr. Simpson's Ford Bronco, picked up fibers from that Bronco, and at some point in time sat or lay on that blanket, there could be fibers from the Bronco on that blanket.
Objection calls for speculation.
Rephrase the question.
Could there be, in your expert opinion, assuming that Mr. Simpson or his children or Miss Nicole Brown Simpson had been in Mr. Simpson's Ford Bronco and gotten fibers from that Bronco on their clothing at some point in time, and then at some other point in time sat or lay on that blanket, fibers could be shed from the Bronco to the blanket?
There's no foundation, calls for speculation.
Overruled. This is another hypothetical question.
Premise of a hypothetical. Are you with me so far?
It's kind of hard to follow, but yes.
And if a dog, have you seen this dog, Cato?
The canine? No.
Cato the dog.
No, I haven't.
In the course of your involvement in this case, you've never seen a dog named Cato?
No, I haven't.
Not at the Rockingham location at some point when you did subsequent searches? Did you see this dog, Cato?
I don't know the dog by name.
Well, were you told that there was a dog that was owned by Mr. Simpson that was involved in this case in some connection?
Objection calls for hearsay and irrelevant.
Overruled.
I know that there was a dog involved in the case somehow, but I couldn't identify that dog for you.
And again, as a basis for this hypothetical, can you assume that if a dog were lying on this blanket in question or moving on this blanket in question, that dog hairs can be transferred to the blanket?
It's irrelevant, calls for speculation.
Overruled. You
Yes.
can answer the
All
question.
right. And the dog itself may have hairs and fibers from other people with whom it has been in contact.
Yes.
That happens, right? In your judgment.
It's possible.
And assuming that to be the fact, that a dog could have shed fibers and hairs on the blanket, and people who had been the children of Mr. Simpson, Mr. Simpson himself, and Miss Nicole Brown Simpson had been in and out of the Bronco and been on that blanket, hairs and fibers from the dog and from the Bronco could be on that blanket.
It's quite a lot for me to
Quite a lot, huh? Assess.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors in there.
Yeah. I'm just asking you to, let's just assume all that occurred and those fibers are on that blanket, all right?
Okay.
You with me?
Yes.
Then if that blanket were transferred and put right into the middle of the crime scene, there is a chance of secondary transfer of those hairs and fibers across this crime scene.
Yes, there's a chance.
As a general principle, as a criminalist, you try at all costs to avoid taking an object that could have lots of hairs and fibers on it and putting it right into the middle of a crime scene, don't you?
That's correct.
That's a terrible mistake from the point of view of a criminalist, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's a terrible mistake, particularly when bodies are being removed, and they're being dragged into the same area where that blanket was.
It can be, yes.
Because that creates a situation where you can have cross-contamination of the fibers from the blanket, and it can come into contact with the clothing of Nicole Brown Simpson.
Your Honor, I think it's unintelligible at this point, is it? That's something that I understood.
Overruled. Could you repeat the last part of this?
We've agreed that it was a terrible mistake to put this blanket into the middle of the crime scene, haven't we?
Your Honor, that misstates the testimony.
I'm asking you.
Overruled.
We're talking about a hypothetical here,
Well, now let's talk specifically.
okay?
This blanket, it was a terrible mistake to put this blanket from inside the house into the middle of the crime scene because of the dangers of cross-contamination of hairs and fibers.
Argumentative and vague as to the word terrible mistake.
Overruled.
Depending on how clean the blanket was, that would affect my answer.
Well, if you had no idea how clean the blanket was, wouldn't it still be a terrible mistake to bring a blanket from inside the house right into the middle of the crime scene?
I would prefer that it was not done.
I'm asking you, was it not, let's start with this, a mistake?
Your Honor, at this point, it is argumentative.
Well, Counsel, you've already asked the question now several times. You've gotten 3 or 4 definitive answers.
Well, Your Honor, I think
I agree, terrible mistake, preference not to have been done. I think you've established the point.
he's back to possible now.
No, you've
All right.
got your record. Proceed.
I'll move on. Assuming that this blanket, well, you had no way of knowing whether that blanket was clean or had fibers on it and hairs, right?
It's correct.
And let's just assume that it did, and even a blanket that appears to be clean can have lots of hairs and fibers on it because the nature of trace evidence is that you really can't see it with the naked eye.
Some trace evidence you can see with the naked eye.
Well, this kind of trace evidence, hairs and fibers, are often not noticed.
You have to look carefully, yes.
So you could look at a blanket and think it was clean, and it could be just full of hairs and fibers.
Possibly. It will have fibers because that's what most blankets
Right?
are made of.
Hairs and fibers from other sources than just what was made up of the blanket itself.
Possibly, yes.
I mean, and one goes about looking for the hairs and fibers later with a strong stereo microscope to pick them up, right?
Sometimes, yes.
Now, based on your observations at the crime scene that day, Miss Nicole Brown Simpson's body was in the area of that blanket,
Yes.
and Mr. Goldman's body was eventually placed in the area of that blanket.
Yes.
And assuming that blanket had hairs and fibers and other trace evidence on it, that could be a source of contamination of anything that was subsequently found on Mr. Goldman's clothing.
I believe the coroner's personnel had placed a sheet and a plastic sheet over the blanket before placing him on it.
Well, given the nature of transfer, just the fact that the blanket is there, even if they put a plastic sheet over it, isn't there a grave danger from the point of view of the criminalist of these secondary transfers occurring when Mr. Goldman's body is put there?
It's vague as to the term grave danger.
Sustain.
All right?
You also forgot the sheet.
Let's start it this way. If the people, there were two individuals from the coroner's office that were involved in moving the body,
Yes,
and Detective Lang was present at the time that the body was moved,
yes,
and Detective Lang could have come in contact with the blanket.
Well, Your Honor, this calls for speculation.
Sustain.
Assuming Detective Lang came in contact with the blanket, could his clothing be a source of secondary transfer from the blanket to Mr. Goldman's clothing?
Objection, improper hypothetical, calls for speculation.
Overruled.
if he was not careful, yes.
Could Mr. Jacobo from the coroner's office, the man we've seen, he was in a blue suit, right, that day?
I don't know him
The
personally.
man in the blue suit from the coroner's office,
The jumper suit?
the jumper suit.
Okay.
If his clothing or body or hands came into contact with that blanket, he could have been a source of the secondary transfer of hairs and fibers from the blanket to Mr. Goldman's clothing.
Possibly.
Miss Ratcliffe from the coroner's office as well. She was the woman investigator from the coroner's office. You recall her?
I recall there being two personnel there, yes.
Right. You remember an African-American woman? You remember seeing her there from the coroner's office?
Yes.
She was the one that had the gray shoes.
I don't remember her shoes.
You've seen her on the video?
Yes.
Same with her, right? Same answer? That if she came in contact with the blanket, she could have been a source of secondary transfer as well.
Possibly.
All right. If you came in contact with the blanket, you could have been a source of secondary transfer
Two.
to Mr. Goldman's clothing.
I was not in that area when the bodies were being processed.
You were not in the area where Mr. Goldman's body was?
Not on the blanket.
I'm sorry?
Not on the blanket. Not that I recall.
I mean, were you in that area where the blanket was and then went over to the area where Mr. Goldman's body was?
Well, it's vague as to time.
Sustain.
At any point before Mr. Goldman's body was moved, did you walk through the area where the blanket was to the area where Mr. Goldman's body was?
I don't recall if I did or not. I don't think I did.
This blanket could have been a source of getting, assuming that the blanket had been covered with hairs and fibers from people within the home, that blanket could then have been a source of secondary transfer to the hairs and the fibers in the whole area of that walkway, that area where Miss Simpson's body was found.
Possibly.
All right. And if an object such as the glove or the hat at Bundy were dragged out into that walkway, they could have become contaminated by hairs and fibers from the blanket.
Improper hypothetical, calls for
Sustain.
speculation.
Assuming the blanket was covered with hairs and fibers and it was placed in the middle of the crime scene, and hairs and fibers from the blanket were spread out from the crime scene, and assuming further that the glove or the hat was dragged into that area when Mr. Goldman's body was moved, they could have become contaminated with hairs and fibers from the blanket.
Same objection.
Overruled.
Possibly.
You saw this blanket at the scene throughout the afternoon when you were processing the Bundy crime scene.
Yes.
And when you left, the blanket was left there,
Yes.
and it was not picked up.
That's correct.
It had blood on it.
Yes, it did.
Frankly, for all you know, it could have had cellular material from people in the Simpson household who had lain on the blanket or sat on the blanket.
Possibly.
You know what I mean by cellular material?
You mean material which would have DNA evidence on it?
Yes.
Yes.
Saliva.
Could it have saliva evidence
Yes,
on it?
no, saliva is a source of DNA evidence.
Now counsel's testimony.
Rephrase the question.
Is saliva a source of DNA evidence?
I'm not a DNA expert. I can't tell you that.
Well, in your training as a criminalist, have you been instructed that saliva can be when spread over a surface, can be a source of evidence for future DNA analysis?
I know it can be analyzed, but I'm not a DNA person. I don't know if saliva can be. Maybe something in the saliva that's associated with it can be, but I don't know if saliva itself is subject to DNA analysis.
Well, saliva, have you ever heard the term amylase?
I've heard the term. I don't know what it is, though.
Do you know whether or not saliva contains cells from the inside of one's mouth?
It can.
All right. And do you know, has anybody ever told you whether or not the cells from the saliva, the cells from the inside of one's mouth can be a source of evidence for purposes of DNA analysis?
The cells inside the mouth can be, yes.
And you even heard of exemplars being taken where someone would put a cotton swab and swab the inside of someone's mouth to take a representative sample for purposes of DNA testing.
Of the cells, yes.
Yes. And the cells from inside the mouth, you would expect, based on your own knowledge, would be in saliva and a source of DNA analysis.
I don't know how easily the cells from the mouth are transmitted into saliva. I've never done a study on it, and I've never worked serology.
From your own common sense, would you expect that saliva contains cells from...
Well, at this point, given his answers, we're speculating.
Okay. Okay. This blanket, withdrawn. Would you agree, looking back, that this blanket could have been a source of trace evidence?
Yes.
Right. And would you agree it would be important to know if that blanket contained hairs and fibers from Mr. Simpson, Ms. Nicole Brown Simpson, their children, or the dog Cato?
Objection, Your Honor. It's arguing that it's the word important.
Oh, whoa.
Yes.
It would be important to know if that blanket contained fibers that would be consistent with Mr. Simpson's Bronco.
Possibly, yes.
Important if it even had hairs or fibers that were consistent with Mr. Goldman, if he'd ever been in the house and lain or sat on that blanket.
Possibly.
But that blanket was left at the crime scene and never picked up for future analysis.
That's correct.
That was a mistake, wasn't it?
It could be considered one.
Incidentally, you've observed the videos,
Yes.
And have you seen in any videos that the blanket over over on Miss Nicole Brown Simpson's back, her body, when it was still at the crime scene?
I've never seen videos of that, no.
You've never seen a video that seemed to, with the blanket over her back?
I may have. I don't recall specifically if I have or not.
Okay. Now, at this point, I'd want to show Mr. Fung a video. Do you want to look at it first? Go ahead. Mr. Goldberg can preview it on the monitor. I think it's actually a segment we've seen before.
Hey, we can view it on council's monitor without displaying it to the jury. Are we familiar with this segment?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, let's proceed.
Yes. Look at this segment, Mr. Fung, that you've just viewed. You've seen this before, haven't you?
I don't know if I've seen it in its entirety, but I've seen portions of it.
Yes. Now, that is Detective Lang talking with Miss Ratcliffe from the coroner's office.
Yes.
And that's Detective Lang putting the blanket down over Ms. Simpson.
Yes.
Now, looking at this segment, see if you can tell us, if you recall, let's stop it right there, okay? Now,
All right, that's at 1:18:17:17.
at this point, do you know which of the two victims was being removed by the coroner's office at this point in time?
Best my recollection, that was Mr. Goldman.
And how long had you been at the scene before this took place, to the best of your recollection?
Approximately 5-10 minutes.
And when you got to the scene, Miss Nicole Brown Simpson's body had not yet been removed from the scene.
She was in the process of being moved.
But when you say that, had she been turned over on her back?
Well, cause of speculation.
Forward.
Turned over on her back. I believe so.
Well, when you got to the crime scene, did you ever have an opportunity to see Miss Nicole Brown Simpson's body in the condition, in the position where you were informed it was originally found?
I don't believe so.
So by the time you got there, she had been already, her body had already been turned over on its back by the coroners.
I believe so, yes.
So you never got an opportunity to see her back, exposed back.
That's correct.
You never got an opportunity to see any blood drops on her back.
That's correct.
And if you had seen those blood drops on her back, you would have been able to swatch them and remove them for future biological analysis.
Well, it's irrelevant as to whether you'll be able to.
Oral.
The collection of evidence on the body is the jurisdiction of the coroner.
But working together, the coroners, the detectives, and the criminalists can decide that it would be useful for the criminalist to collect evidence from a body found at a homicide scene.
It's possible. Usually the coroner will have his own, or the coroner's department has their own criminalist, though.
But the coroner's department criminalist wasn't there.
That's correct.
And this is already 10:15 in the afternoon, in the morning,
Yes,
and the coroner's office didn't have their criminalist there.
that's correct.
And you were the only criminalists at the scene,
Yeah, no, Miss Mazzola was there also.
and Miss Mazzola, right?
And Chief Forensic Chemist Johnson.
And between that Chief Forensic Chemist Johnson, he's a supervisor, right?
Yes, he is.
And we're going to see him, you've seen him in videos. He's a heavy-set guy in a blue blazer.
Very tall also.
Tall, okay. Now, given the fact that you're the criminalist at the scene, if there had been no coroner's criminalist at the scene, wouldn't it have been your responsibility to remove the blood drops from Nicole Brown Simpson's back?
Not necessarily, no.
Well, if the criminalist from the coroner's office isn't there, and you're not going to do it, who could do it?
It might wait until the body was transported back to the coroner's office and it could be done there.
But, Mr. Fung, if the body is turned over on its back, on her back, that could smear, and contaminate those blood drops.
It's possible.
And wouldn't it be the wise practice, the sound practice, to have a criminalist, be it from the coroner's office or SID, remove those blood drops before Ms. Simpson was turned over on her back?
It'd be preferable.
Preferable?
Yes.
Well, if it wasn't going to be done by a criminalist at the scene, be it from your office or the coroner's office, and she's turned over on the back, it's not going to happen, right?
Sustained.
Well, Mr. Fung, it's your testimony that you were at the scene too late to remove those blood drops from her back before she was turned over.
Who states the evidence?
Sustained.
When you got there, she was already turned over on her back.
I believe so.
Well, when she's turned over on her back, well, withdrawn. The blanket that was on her back before she was turned over, that might contain transfers of the blood from her back.
Possibly.
And that could have been analyzed if it had been secured, brought back to the laboratory.
Yes.
And if that analysis, withdrawn. Okay, let's get back to the picture.
Are you
So-
shifting right now?
I'm sorry?
Are you shifting, or we want to finish?
I'm going, I did a segue. I'm sorry. Going right back to the video now.
I need to change court reporters.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All right.
This time?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a 10-minute recess. Please remember my admonitions to you. Don't discuss the case amongst yourselves. Let's have it quiet in the courtroom, please. Believe it or not, the admonition is a very important and necessary part of the court proceeding each time. Please remember my admonitions to you. Don't discuss the case amongst yourselves, form any opinions about the case, conduct any deliberations till the matter has been submitted to you, or allow anybody to communicate with you with regard to the case. We'll take a recess for 10 minutes. All right, Mr. Funk, you can step down. All right, let's have the jurors, please. We've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Mr. Dennis Fung is on the witness stand, undergoing cross-examination by Mr. Sheck. And Mr. Sheck, you may resume with your cross-examination.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fung, we left off with the video that is stopped at 1:18:17, 1:18:17:03. Now, where are you coming from? Do you recall?
Coming from the cage area in the dirt.
And where had you been in the cage area prior to stepping into view here?
I don't think I was much deeper than 2 feet into the cage area.
And from the moment that you arrived at the crime scene to the point that we see depicted here, had you seen anybody else walk through that caged-in area?
Yes.
Detective Lang?
I'm not sure who, but I do recall people walking in there.
Anyone else?
I don't recall who exactly.
More than one person?
Yes.
Now, you spent some time and had some training in taking shoe print impressions.
Yes.
And those shoe print impressions can be taken from soil.
Yes.
If there is an impression in soil, one can use a variety of techniques of casting to lift those shoe impressions from soil.
Yes.
If there had been some killer or perpetrator hiding in that rear of that caged-in area, that perpetrator could have left shoe print impressions in the soil.
Possibly.
And if you had arrived at the crime scene before people began walking into that area and had observed such impressions, you could have done a casting on them.
If some were there, yes.
And you have no idea whether any were there because people had been walking in and out of there before you arrived.
Sustained. Calls for speculation.
Were you able to conduct a methodical, systematic, unhurried investigation of the soil in the caged-in area with Mr. Goldman's body in place as it was originally found?
No.
And that's what you have particular training to do.
That is one of the things I am trained to do, yes.
Now, do you recall what you were doing in that caged-in area just prior to the picture we see on the screen?
Detective Lang had asked if he could see the glove from Rockingham, and I brought the bag over to him.
When did he ask you to do this?
Shortly after I got to the Bundy location.
And where were you situated when he came and made this request?
I don't know exactly.
Were you in the area where Miss Nicole Brown Simpson's body was at that point?
Where it was,
Yes,
or
you
where
said
it had
you-
been moved from.
Well, when you arrived, you saw her body,
Yes.
and you saw the by this point, I think you've told us the people from the coroner's office had turned her over.
She was, for lack of a better expression, being wrapped up.
Yes. And was at that point, did Detective Lang come out of this area and talk to you out on the sidewalk in front of this crime scene?
Again, I don't know the exact location where he requested seeing the glove.
You can't recall.
I don't recall.
But after he requested you to go to bring him the glove, that's what he requested?
He requested that, or he said he wanted to see the glove from Rockingham, yes.
And when he said, I'd like to see the glove from Rockingham, did you say to him, Detective Lang, why don't you come see it in the crime scene truck?
I told him that once I brought the glove to him that...
No, I'm asking at the moment he came and made this request to you, did you say to him...
That wasn't the question. Let the witness answer the question.
No, I think that was the question.
Re-ask the question.
At the time that Detective Lang came to you and asked you to show him the Rockingham glove, did you say to him, Detective Lang, why don't you come see it at the crime scene truck? It's not a very good idea for me to bring this glove from Rockingham into the middle of the Bundy crime scene.
I didn't say that to him.
Did you say words to that effect?
When he wanted me to remove or wanted to get a better look at the glove from Rockingham, I told him that I would not remove the glove from the bag. It would have to remain in the bag. And if he wanted to see a better look of it, that he would have to see it in the crime scene truck.
Well, at the moment that he asked you to go show him the glove and bring it back into the middle of the crime scene, you knew that was not a very good idea, didn't you?
I knew that
Vegas, a very good idea.
Overruled.
I knew that I would have to be cautious with the evidence.
Mr. Fung, you knew it was not a very sensible request, didn't you?
It's Vegas to which request?
Sustained.
Mr. Fung, when Detective Lang requested that you bring the glove into the middle of the Bundy crime scene to show it to him, you had concerns that there was a terrible danger of cross-contamination.
I knew there was a danger for cross-contamination, yes.
And you knew when he made that request of you that that request was a basic violation of sound crime scene procedures.
I knew that I would have to be careful with the glove when I brought it to him, yes.
Well, when he made that request to you, didn't you say to yourself, it's foolish to even take a chance in bringing that glove into the middle of the Bundy crime scene?
He felt it was important at that point for his investigation.
Well, but you thought when he made that request to you that it wasn't a sensible request.
Again, as I have stated before, I knew I would have to be careful with the evidence.
Well, my question to you is a simple one, sir. When he made that request to you, you knew it was not a sensible request.
Sustained.
Did you think at the moment that he made that request to you, it was creating a risk of an unnecessary risk of contamination?
Same objection.
Overruled.
I knew there was a risk, but it was important to him at that time to further his investigation.
Well, when he made that request to you, didn't you believe it was an unnecessary risk to take, that he could have just come right back to the truck and see it?
Sustained.
Mr. Fung, were you in any way fearful of questioning Detective Lang's judgment when he asked you to bring that Rockingham glove right into the middle of the Bundy crime scene?
I was not fearful of him, no.
Were you in any way intimidated by him?
No.
Were you in any way reluctant to question his judgment, even though you believed it was a dangerous request?
I did have some concern, and I took what I felt was, I drew a line where I would not take the bag or take the glove out of the bag for him.
Well, at the moment he made the request to you, you're now telling us that you had concerns.
Sustained.
Did you say you had concerns at the moment he made the request to you?
Sustained.
Did you express any concerns to Detective Lang at the moment that he asked you to go to the crime scene truck and bring the glove into the middle of the Bundy crime scene?
Oh, well, different question.
I'm not sure if I did. I may have.
You may have?
I don't know if I did.
Now, you brought the glove. How did you get with that bag that you have in your hand? That's the Rockingham glove?
The glove was in that bag, yes.
Well, how did you come not just to take the glove from the truck to the area of in front of the steps, but all the way in back, all the way into that caged-in area? How did that come about?
I don't know the exact route that I took. I probably came in through the same way I came in, or exited.
Mr. Fung, did you ever collect a pager in the caged-in area?
Yes.
Could that shot with you with the bag in your hand be of the pager in the bag?
No.
No? You have a distinct recollection that you actually took the Rockingham glove in a bag, walked into the crime scene area, went into the caged-in area, and then were coming out, as we see depicted in this shot, with the Rockingham glove in the bag.
Yes.
Are you aware that before you came here, Detective Lang testified that it was the Rockingham glove in that bag?
Sustained.
I.
Sustained.
You don't know.
No, sorry.
Now, you're not wearing gloves in that picture.
That's correct.
So, as I understand it, what you're telling us is that when Detective Lang made this request to you, you resolved in your own mind, all right, I know it's dangerous, but I'll bring the glove into the area of the crime scene, but I won't open it up for him.
But I won't take the glove out of the bag.
Won't take the glove out of the bag.
Yes.
Had you resolved in your own mind whether you would even open it up?
I would open it up.
You would have opened it up.
Yes.
Did you open it up while you were in the crime scene? Have him look.
I don't think so.
Well, another thing about trace evidence is that sometimes it becomes airborne.
Sometimes.
Hairs and fibers that may get on clothing of people that are gathering evidence can become airborne. That's how the transfer occurs, right?
Theoretically, yes.
And weren't you concerned about opening up the bag with the Rockingham glove in the same area where people were milling around, gathering and handling the evidence at the Bundy crime scene?
Sustained.
All right. Weren't you concerned about taking the bag with the Rockingham glove and opening it up while evidence collectors were in the area?
Ms. Mazzola and I were the evidence collectors.
Well, there are other people there from the coroner's office who were in the area when you might have opened up that bag, right?
They were there to process the bodies.
Well, regardless of their purpose, there are people that could have trace evidence on their clothing which could become airborne.
Trace evidence is usually made through contact, such as rubbing one item against another. I'm not, it can happen through airborne, but that's not the usual way for
Well,
that type of evidence to be
you're saying that
done.
in your experience and based on your expertise and knowledge, it's not a concern of yours that these hairs and fibers could be, that hairs and fibers can be transferred off people's clothing when they're moving around and fall onto other areas.
It can happen, yes.
And Detective Fung, weren't you,
Restate the question.
Detective, I'm sorry, Mr. Fung, weren't you seriously concerned that it was a unnecessary risk to open up that bag containing the Rockingham glove in the Bundy crime scene to give Detective Lang a look?
I did have my concerns, and I told you I was going to be careful if
Well-
I did have to open up the bag.
Well, you're telling us now, is it your testimony you can't remember whether or not you opened up the bag?
To the best of my recollection, I did not open up the bag.
Well, you're now more certain of that answer than you were just a few minutes ago?
Sorry.
Sustained.
Didn't you tell us just a few minutes ago you couldn't recall whether or not you opened up the bag to have Detective Lang look in it?
I'm not sure if I,
You're not sure?
I'm not sure.
And it's fair enough to say, isn't it, that if you'd done that, that would have been a mistake.
I wouldn't call it a mistake, no.
Well, wouldn't that be something that you were doing against your better judgment at the request of Detective Lang?
Ideally, the glove should have been looked at the crime scene truck. Yes.
And isn't it true, sir, that you were reluctant to just tell Detective Lang, look, I'm not bringing it to the scene, come look at it at the truck?
It's irrelevant.
Well, we'll
I don't think I was reluctant, no.
You had, and at that Bundy crime scene, did you at any point have reluctance to question Detective Lang's judgment about what should be done in terms of gathering evidence?
Did I have, yes, yes, I did.
You were reluctant to question his judgment about what should be done in terms of gathering evidence.
I did question his judgment.
You did question his judgment. Could you tell us about when and how you questioned his judgment?
No, there are you always second guess somebody when you're going into a crime scene. You say, was this done? Was that done? And you ask them what was done and what wasn't done.
Can you tell us which questions you asked Detective Lang that, in your terms, were second guesses?
I asked him if he had looked for shoe prints in the dirt area.
And he told you he hadn't.
He told me he had looked for them but did not find any.
Well, I thought you were questioning, these are matters where you were questioning his judgment, right?
Well, I asked him, these were things I asked him about.
Well, I'm asking you for things where you were questioning his judgment. Tell us about second guesses you made of Detective Lang.
Your Honor, I'd ask that the witness be allowed to continue his answer to the first question.
Have you finished your answer, Mr. Fung?
I forgot the first question.
All right, we have the question.
Maybe we could, now, in this frame, do you recall where you're stepping?
Not exactly, no.
Did you have your hands out on the, for support on the gate?
No.
Were you able to see as you're walking with your head down the position of the glove and the hat?
I was looking where I was stepping, yes.
And you were looking at the glove and the hat?
I don't recall if I was, what exactly I was seeing at that point.
Well, in that area, was there not the glove and the hat and the envelope that contained the prescription glasses?
Yes.
And I take it that the piece of paper that we looked at earlier was nowhere to be seen.
Again, from this video, I
Can't
I don't know what I was seeing at this point.
Okay. Other than, so you don't know if you were looking down at those objects at that time?
No, I don't.
Maybe we can,
Your Honor, before we do that, perhaps the frame number should be put on the record.
I think we
I'm not sure
We
what
did,
that's.
we did that.
Oh, it was done? This one?
Where are you going there? Do you recall?
I believe I was putting bringing the glove back to the crime scene truck.
And where is Detective Lang now?
He is still back in the cage area.
And do you know where he's standing in relationship to the envelope and the glove as best you can see it?
No, I don't know.
What are you doing now, sir?
I'm standing by.
Do you recall this moment, other than just seeing it here in the video?
No.
And you're now you just wiped sweat from your brow and were grasping your glasses. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, do you recall whether photographs were being taken now of Mr. Goldman's body, various parts of it?
I don't recall.
Did you observe any of that process with respect to either Mr. Goldman or Ms. Simpson?
I don't recall seeing that, no.
You don't recall seeing that done at all?
I don't recall seeing actual photographs being taken. I know the photographer was present.
All right. Now, you're having a conversation and we're laughing with a few gentlemen there. Do you know what that was about? Do you recall?
No, I don't.
And that man in the red hair, in the blue blazer, that's Chief Forensic Chemist Johnson. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And at the time that Mr. Goldman's body is being moved now and Detective Lang is walking through the scene, you're looking back. Do you recall seeing the location of the envelope, the glove, and the hat?
No, I don't.
Okay, now you see Detective Lang walking back through as the body's being taken away. I think we can cut it now. Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. Now, have you ever heard the term close-in crime scene?
Close-in crime scene?
Yes.
No.
Well, did you ever have a discussion with Detective Lang as to his approach to gathering evidence at this Bundy crime scene on the morning of June 13th?
I don't understand quite what you're getting at.
Well, when you arrived at the scene, you had a discussion with Detective Lang about the crime scene and how to proceed.
He gave me a briefing as to the type of evidence that he wanted collected and what he felt was important and what areas were preserved. Yes.
Did he ever express the view to you that this was a close-in crime scene where evidence was close to the victims and that he had made a determination for that reason to remove the victims prior to collecting the evidence because of the fact that the evidence and the victims were close to each other.
I don't think he ever used that term close-in crime scene to
Well,
me.
did he ever express the view to you that the reason that it was appropriate to remove the bodies before collecting the evidence is that this was a close-in crime scene, or this was a crime scene, where since the bodies of the victims and the evidence were close together, it was sensible to remove the bodies before collecting the evidence?
Objection irrelevant, calls for hearsay.
Oh, well,
Could you repeat the question again, please?
Sure. Did Detective Lang ever express the view to you that he thought it was appropriate at this crime scene to remove the victims prior to the evidence because the evidence was located close to the bodies of the victims?
He did not express that to me at the crime scene.
At some subsequent time, did he express that view to you?
Yes.
And when was that?
That was maybe a week or two later.
And that was on an occasion when you were having a discussion with him as to how he processed the crime scene?
Yes.
And on that occasion, did you express the view to him that it was extremely foolish to remove the bodies of the victims and drag it through the evidence at the Bundy crime scene before the evidence was collected?
sustained.
Did you express the view to Detective Lang that in your judgment as a criminalist, the evidence should have been collected before the bodies were removed precisely because the evidence were close to the bodies?
I never said that to him, no.
Did you say anything to that effect to him?
I don't recall if I did or not.
In your opinion as a criminalist, Mr. Fung, isn't it just basic, fundamental principle that when the evidence are close to the bodies, that it's better for the criminalist to collect it, photograph it, document it before you remove the bodies?
There are many ways to process a crime scene, and I do not know all the factors that went into Detective Lang's decision.
Well, when you arrived at the Bundy crime scene and had a discussion with Detective Lang, weren't you at all concerned that the bodies were being removed when they were in such close proximity to the evidence that you were going to have to collect?
Yes.
Now, we just saw a picture where you're standing there with Chief Forensic Chemist Stephen Johnson.
Yes.
He's one of your supervisors.
Yes.
And you were standing there with other detectives.
Yes.
And you were standing around this crime scene while Mr. Goldman's body was being removed from the soil caged-in area.
Yes.
And that opening between the gate and the beginning of the concrete stairwell is about 30 inches, isn't it?
Approximately.
And didn't you have profound concerns that in moving Mr. Goldman's body through that area, they were going to alter the condition of the glove and the hat and the envelope that was right against the tile?
Argument is profound, sir.
Sustained. It's not
Did you
argument,
have
it's
a
sustained.
concern that when they
Let
were...
me, counsel,
I'm sorry.
when I speak and rule on an objection, just for the record, let me finish before you launch into the next question.
My apologies, Your Honor.
Sustained, term is vague.
All right. Did you have a concern that when Mr. Goldman's body was going to be taken through this 30-inch area, that it could disturb alter the prescription envelope, the glove, and the knit hat?
It's vague as to disturb, alter.
Overruled. All right, Mr. Scheck, I'm sorry, I need to interrupt you just for a moment. We need to take a brief comfort break. All right. Members of the jury, if you want to stand and stretch a bit, go ahead. Audience as well. All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Scheck?
Actually, the last question, be right back, I'm sorry.
Last question was, did you have concern that when Mr. Goldman's body was going to be taken through the 30-inch area, that it could disturb or alter the envelope containing the prescription eyeglasses, the glove, and the knit hat?
I did not have an opportunity to be concerned because Mr. Goldman was moved by the time I got back from the crime scene truck.
But when you arrived, Mr. Goldman hadn't been moved.
That's correct.
Did you express concern to Detective Lang? Well, whatever you do, don't move Mr. Goldman's body, or the body of the second victim there, through this 30-inch area where you have the glove, the envelope, and the hat.
I don't believe I had an opportunity to speak with Detective Lang before that point.
Well, don't you think that was an important thing to tell him?
Your Honor, it's irrelevant.
Sustained.
Did you think at the time that that was a matter that should be brought to his attention?
Irrelevant.
That's overruled.
I had no idea he was going to move Mr. Goldman.
Well, were you shocked that he directed the coroners or permitted the coroners to move Mr. Goldman through that evidence?
Argumentative. Irrelevant.
Sustained.
Were you surprised?
Sustained.
Were you concerned when you saw that he had permitted the coroners or directed them to move Mr. Goldman's body through that evidence?
Same objection.
Overruled.
I was concerned, yes.
Did you express that concern to Chief Forensic Chemist Steve Johnson, who was standing right there?
Irrelevant.
Sustained.
Did Chief Forensic Chemist Johnson, to your knowledge, say anything to you about it?
No.
Did you say anything to him about it?
Yes, I did.
What did you say?
I asked him about the moving of the bodies.
You expressed concern that that was a bad idea.
I expressed to him that I was concerned about it, yes.
And to your knowledge, he never did anything about it.
Irrelevant.
Sustained.
To your knowledge, did he do anything about it?
Your Honor, it's irrelevant.
Sustained.
Now, one of the start this way. Your Honor, I've queued up two pictures that I've shown to the prosecutor of the glove, and I'd like, with the court's permission, to show them to the witness
Right.
and to the jury. Mr. Fung, as I guess I'm looking at it here, to the left is a photograph of the glove and the hat with an evidence tag that says 102, correct?
I can't make out the hat from the
from the screen, but I do see the glove.
See the glove? Do you, look carefully.
On
at
the
corner.
right, I
Yeah.
see a very dark area next to the glove. I can't make it out as a hat, though.
All right. And to the picture to the right, with the picture of the finger pointing at the glove, you see that?
Yes.
You've seen that picture before, correct?
Today, yes.
All right. You seen any picture like that before with a finger pointing at the glove, perhaps in the grand jury?
Perhaps, but I don't remember it.
Well, at any time prior to coming into this courtroom, have you seen that picture? Or a picture like depicting the glove in that position?
Your Honor, we've gone over this and it's irrelevant.
We have. We've gone over this.
All right.
He's identified what it is.
Okay. My question to you, sir, is, isn't it clear to you that the picture on the right, the one with the finger pointing at the glove is in a different position than the one to the left?
Yes.
Glove's been turned around completely, hasn't it?
It is in a different position, yes.
Well, could you describe the differences?
Your Honor, this violates the best evidence rule. Picture speaks for itself.
Or will, if you can tell.
On the picture on the right, the opening or wrist portion appears to be towards the pavement, and in the picture on the left, the glove is in a different position with the wrist in another orientation.
And there's some debris.
Let me see counsel without the report. Thank you, counsel. Proceed.
Now,
1075? All right, this side-by-side photo image will mark as 1075, Defense Exhibit 1075.
you see in the picture to the left, the one with the evidence marker on it, what appear to be drag marks.
I mean, coming from the upper left-hand corner?
Yes.
Could be, yes.
And you see debris now on top of the tiles.
I see what appear to be leaves on the tiles.
Now, has this discrepancy ever been pointed out to you before you came into this courtroom?
I haven't seen the picture, or I don't recall seeing the picture on the right, so no.
No one has ever, it has never come to your attention before coming into this courtroom that the picture of the glove on the right that was taken before you arrived at the crime scene showed the glove in a different position than the picture that you directed be taken on June 13th.
That's never been brought to my attention, no.
Has anybody, did you inquire of anybody on June 13th when you took the picture on the left whether or not the glove had been moved into a different position than it originally was after Mr. Goldman's body had been removed?
I assumed they had not been moved.
I'm sorry?
I assumed that they had not been moved.
You assumed that they had not been moved.
That's right.
Well, you told us before that you had a concern that the glove and the envelope and the hat might be moved when Mr. Goldman's body was taken away. Didn't you?
I think that misstates the evidence.
Sustained.
All right. After you saw Mr. Goldman's body being removed, did you make inquiry of Detective Lang as to whether or not the glove was in the same place as it was before Mr. Goldman's body was removed?
No.
It's irrelevant.
Sustained.
from the moment you arrived at the Bundy crime scene to the moment that you've seen these pictures in the courtrooms, do you ever recall seeing the glove in a different position than is depicted in these photographs?
At the scene, the glove at the scene.
Glove at the scene.
I remember the glove being in the position that it is with the identification card next to it.
The 102 photograph.
Yes.
You never saw the glove in any different position prior to the time it was collected.
I don't recall it being in a different position, no.
You never saw that glove on top of the tiles.
On the walkway?
Yeah.
No.
You ever saw that glove on or near the blanket?
I don't recall, no.
I'd like to show you a video, Mr. Fong. Do you recall, while we're setting this up, do you recall that Detective Van Adder arrived at the crime scene that morning at Bundy?
I don't recall if it was in the morning or in the afternoon, but he did make a brief stopover.
And when he stopped by, he walked up the stairs and had a brief talk with you at some point?
He may have, I don't recall.
And you recall that Chief Forensic Chemist Johnson at some point walked up that stairwell at Bundy?
At some point he did, yes.
And do you recall that those two gentlemen walked up there before the gloves and the knit hat were collected?
I don't recall if it was before or after.
Do you recall putting
I had checked, this is the who's back on Nevin gloves.
glove,
Assisting.
glove, the Bundy glove, my apology,
All right, rephrase the question.
the Bundy glove? Do you remember putting down evidence cards near the glove and the hat and the envelope prior to their collection,
Yes.
prior to the photographs being taken?
Prior?
Yes.
Yes.
You did that.
Yes.
I'd like to show you some video.
Perhaps I could see this first. I'm not sure what he's about to play.
All right. How long is this segment?
Very short.
I think we need to approach.
All right. Counsel, please, that reaction is not necessary. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as far as the jury is concerned, we're going to take a recess for the afternoon session at this time. Please remember all of my admonitions to you. Do not discuss the case amongst yourselves, form any opinions about the case. Do not conduct any deliberations until the matter has been submitted to you. Do not allow anybody to communicate with you with regards to the case. As far as the jury is concerned, we will stand in recess until tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Mr. Fung, you may step down. You're ordered to return tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. All right, we also have motions on, so as soon as we clear the jury, we'll resume with this evidence and motions.
I represent to you that there's two sets of videos, and if Mr. Goldberg and the prosecution look, they'll see two versions of this. One that is as depicted here, and another one that has the counter on it. We chose the one without the counter on it because it gives it a view that is unobstructed by the counter. But I'm confident that if they go back and look at the video, they will see this.
Well, the problem may be, as I was about to say, that because it's edited into three separate segments that are arranged in some chronological order by the defense, it may be that I'm not recognizing one of those three sequences. But we object to the sequencing itself, and that I think what counsel is trying to portray is some sort of historical view of what happened at that crime scene in the chronological order. And this video tape that has been apparently edited does not do that, because it's showing three distinct things.
Mr. Chet?
Your Honor, I think that what this video depicts is, and Mr. Goldberg can go back and look and consult with the original footage as much as possible, but I think there is an object on that screen that we believe could well be the glove that's on the walkway near the blanket. And it's there during these periods of time when Mr. Van Adder is walking through, at what I think is consistent with his testimony at about 9:45 when he's going to consult Detective Lang for the warrant. We have other footage of Mr. Fung and Detective Van Adder conversing. They can look at that. Mr. Johnson, the witness testified, walked through the crime scene. I think there's a clear picture of that. And then finally, we have Mr. Fung placing down the exhibits. This seemed to be the most expeditious way to zero in on the issue and ask him if he knows what that object
All right, so
is.
you're saying that one of these videos is going to have something that appears to be the glove on the walkway?
Well, I think all three of them do. That's
All right,
our position, where we want to
let's
certainly
see
make
it
an
again.
inquiry. We want to make an inquiry as to what that object is, because it looks to us like the glove, and we want the witness's best recollection and view as to what that object is. That's the purpose of showing him these.
Let's see it again. Is this in some type of order chronologically?
To the best we can reconstruct it, it is. But I think that the important point, and we could make this clear to the jury, is that all of these shots are taken at a point prior to the time that Mr. Fung sets down the cards, the photographs are taken, and the glove is collected.
All right, let's have a look again.
See that on the right-hand side of the screen, Your Honor?
I do.
We contend that's the glove. Goes in and out of focus. We think that's clearly in a position either on or near the blanket, inside the tiles. We stopped it there, so we want to have Mr. Fung take a look at that. He's previously seen this footage, but perhaps he didn't notice it. Can we show the next one? Yeah. Next one that I believe is Detective Van Adder walking through. And I think the same object can be seen near his feet. Finally, we have Mr. Fung placing down the cards, and I think in that shot you can see the object in the same position as when Mr. Johnson and Detective Van Adder were walking through with Mr. Fung putting down the evidence card.
So you're going to ask him, what is that?
That's right.
Okay. All right, Mr. Goldberg, any further comment?
It's still photographs. we could take this up in the morning so that I could have an opportunity to take a closer look at still photographs and also the video.
Take it up at 8:30. 8:30. I'm sorry?
We see it one more time.
All right, well, how about if we do this? I have a whole panoply of media motions to address. So if you want time to look at these items, I'm sure you have the same videotapes, correct?
There are two cassettes of videos that I'm sure Mr. Goldberg and Mr. Fung have looked through. It's the same two cassettes. And I think if the court has a copy of those cassettes as well, we've made those available since the opening statement. If you look through those, you'll see this, and you'll see this a number of times. I would make one further request, however, and I realize it hasn't been the custom or practice in the court, but I would make a request that the prosecutors be constrained not to discuss this issue with Mr. Fung or prior to his return to the stand tomorrow, because we think that this is important impeachment material, and we don't think that they ought to be discussing their arguments with him before he answers the questions on this issue.
Mr. Goldberg?
Your Honor, I would object to that. There is no prohibition under California law from the parties discussing matters with the witnesses. And there's no legal basis for the defendant's motion.
Your Honor, may I prefer to make this one exception? I come from jurisdictions where, in fact, this rule is in place, generally speaking, but I would defer to Mr. Cochran to maybe address this question since he knows these matters better than I. Court's permission.
I'll ask the legal court to address the court as well on this issue. Mr. Cochran, I'm sorry, Your Honor, but Mr. Sheck has come into this court, and when they do that, they're...
Well, she's already talking, Your Honor, and rather than hear that, let me talk to Mr. Shetland, please, Your Honor.
It's like the World Series where we have designated hitter rules, huh? Alternately. Nothing. Forget it.
Last point I want to make in this regard is that we were unfortunately cut off by the objections before we could finish this impeachment at the break. And all we want is to be put in the same position what we were just prior to the break when the witness was being confronted with the video.
Mr. Goldberg?
Your Honor, I thought we had a rule in this court that we were supposed to see the exhibits beforehand, and particularly with something like video. I think this happened at about 5 minutes of...
Well, I'm not particularly concerned with that. He's asked that I make an order that you not discuss the matter with Mr. Fung between now and tomorrow morning when he's shown the video matters before the jury. What's your comment on that?
And my comment is that the law and practice of the state of California is that we are allowed to talk to our witnesses. You are allowed to talk to your witnesses at breaks. You are allowed to talk to them over lunch, before trial, after trial, and so on. We know that is the rule. So why would we make an exception and carve out an exception for this witness that we didn't carve out for anyone else, that we didn't carve out for Rosa Lopez or any of the other witnesses that testified over a number of days and have the opportunity to speak to the parties, to the attorneys representing either side over those breaks? I don't see any reason to impose some different rule with Mr. Fung that is customarily applied in this state, in this court, and in this case in particular.
All right. Mr. Schick, I'm not aware of any statutory authority in the evidence code that gives me the power to do what you're asking.
One final request in that regard, then. I would make the argument to Your Honor that the objection at the end, I think, as a simple tactical matter, prevented the impeachment at the appropriate time. So it asked the courts, I'm sure you have discretion. If it's not in the evidence
Well,
code.
I agree. I think
I'm sure you have discretion.
Yeah.
And so I just
let's
ask you to
assume that I
exercise
do.
your discretion.
All right. Let's assume that I do. I decline. All right. All right. Then counsel will, but this picture speaks pretty powerfully for itself.
And just for the court's edification, I've examined all these photographs very carefully, and there's some others that I'll call to the court's attention that we've considered in this regard, and that is, there's another shot that I'm sure the prosecutors have seen that contains some leaves, all right, in the area where the photograph was taken. And in our judgment, those leaves cannot account for what we see on that screen. And so if they're going to make an objection that they think this is misleading because there's another photograph, because there's leaves in that area, I don't think that's consistent with the glove. So maybe to save some time, I'll proffer these photographs to the court. You can examine it and examine the video, and maybe we can move on quickly tomorrow with the impeachment, because I
We'll take
think
it up
that may
tomorrow morning.
forestall them.
I'll give the prosecution time to search their videotapes and look at this thing. I'll ask Mr. Harris and Ms. Fitzpatrick to stick around so we can all take a look at it again. But I need to deal with the motions I had scheduled for 4 o'clock.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Madam Reporter, you need about a couple minutes, or can you go on the motions? Okay.
Mr. Garber, our position. 6 and 10.
Your position?
Yeah, it was.
What?
Well, I have Mr. Hodgman here.
Yeah.